Part 1. He was into video games from an early age. He spent almost his entire childhood in hospitals, where there was nothing to do, so they became an essential part of his life. However, it is not for nothing that they say that if you do something for too long, it gets boring. At some point, games just stopped being fun. AOS, RPG, FPS, whatever genre you choose, all the games that came out year after year were complete crap. They were a lot like their predecessors in terms of plot and world building, there was no depth to them. Until one day he stumbled upon it. Dungeon Stone is an indie RPG pixelated 2D graphics that have lost popularity recently, and yes, and an exclusively English interface. He doesn't usually play this sort of thing, but since it's free, why not? Despite the downsides, he was impressed by the variety of characters and the overhead camera, which hadn't been used in a while. Pretty quickly he figured out how to play, and he didn't even notice how quickly the time flew by. The game, which at first glance seemed outdated and uninteresting, had a couple of crappy, but at the same time favorably distinguishing it from other games, details. The first is the NPCs needed for pumping. When the main character dies, all progress is reset to 0. At first it was fun, but then he persistently tried to pass it, often breaking down into a scream. Due to the low popularity of the game, could not find guides in Korean or even English, so we will have to pass on our own. From the moment he started playing at the hospital, to getting a job at the information office, to going to university, graduating, and interviewing, every time on his way home from work, he kept playing Dungeon and Stone. Death, 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 that was the outcome, no matter how hard he tried. But after 9 years, he still managed to make it to the final boss room. The question of whether he definitely wanted to enter there surprised the guy. After all, the best years had been spent for this purpose. However, the warning that followed the affirmative answer puzzled him. The game said that after such a decision there would be no turning back. However, he thought it was a joke from the developers. The guy sat back in his chair, already anticipating the upcoming battle, when suddenly the screen appeared in Korean. The window announced the completion of training and user verification. Suddenly, a bright light poured out of the monitor and, as if burning through his body, the boy lost consciousness. And when he opened his eyes and got to his feet, he was faced with an indescribable picture: torches instead of light bulbs, muscular painted barbarians on all sides, and a strange man making a speech in the center of the crowd. The speaker congratulated his warriors on getting out of this sacred place today and ordered them to arm themselves. The young man was panic-stricken what to arm himself with, and more importantly, why to arm himself with. He tried to pull himself together and thought about what he would do if this was the introduction to a game. He groped himself for injuries, but suddenly felt something strange. Rough palms, strong muscles and tattoos, and he moved surprisingly easily. In fact, he was no longer the skinny nerd who sat in his room all day lifting nothing heavier than a gamepad. Now he was a real barbarian who seemed to have been training since infancy. His musings were interrupted by the thundering voice of the leader, ordering those who were named to approach. Those who approached chose the most suitable weapons for their own use. The situation seemed quite familiar to him, young men taking turns choosing weapons. Suddenly he remembered this was how the game for the barbarian he had chosen at the start started. He didn't know how this could have happened, but it was clear that he was a character from Dungeon and Stone. Another warrior stood beside him, his face twitching with terror. Haunted by panic, he asked the people present while saying the name of the game. It looked like he too had gotten here from the real world. In thought, the boy didn't even notice the gray-haired leader approaching him, asking if he had just cast his vote. The young man pointed to the man standing next to him. The poor guy asked about the dungeon and the stone, but was immediately killed by a powerful blow from the angry leader. The young man realized that if he showed emotion, he would be the next corpse, so he simply turned away, staring ahead. The man stated that Orm, son of Kajua, had been possessed by an evil spirit and ordered the others to forget everything said by that demon. The leader then went to his original place to continue the ceremony. In the time he spent here, the guy realized a few things. The first was that people transferred into the game from the real world are called evil spirits. Second, if they found out about it, they would definitely be killed. And 3, his head could be rolling on the ground right now. Conclusion, no way to get caught. There's just one problem. He doesn't know his own name. He was angry that this damn game could have at least given him a warning. a window of ability, for example. He couldn't go out at random, because if there were more evil spirits, they might do the same. Then the young barbarian decided that if no one moved after 2 seconds, he should go. At least, there was no other option. Finally, the speaker spoke the name of Bjorn, son of Yandel. He counted down to 2 and, hoping that it was him, moved away. Part 2. The leader looked straight into his eyes, then greeted the young warrior and ordered him to choose a weapon. Needless to say, the size of the stone fell from his shoulders, so Bjorn, son of Jandel, was his name. The next major decision was the choice of weapons. In return for their lack of magical talents, barbarians are endowed with immense physical strength. The young barbarian decided to begin his advancement as a melee fighter, and chose a shield as his equipment. At least, it was the best he could choose right now. The leader looked at him thoughtfully, and then congratulated him on becoming a true warrior. A characterization window appeared on the monitor, which remained running in the empty room, reporting that the synchronization had been successful and the data had been transferred to the administrator. At the first game for the barbarian guy chose a huge sword, because it just looked cool, but did not last long and died almost instantly. Two-handed axe, hammer, mace, he tried a lot of weapons and combinations, but could not reveal the potential. It is impossible to pass the game calmly when you are constantly on the verge of life and death. But one day it dawned on him, is it necessary to play as a barbarian in the attack? After all, this class has high survivability and strength. Although not comparable to the dwarf, but the basis for a good tank is there. Having tried it in business, the young man realized that he found the perfect solution. The barbarian in defense turned out to be a real imba. That's why there was no more logical solution in the current situation. Barbarians who have passed the ceremony go straight to the labyrinth. And for that they go to the city of the labyrinth, Rapdonia. The leader of the barbarians addressed the warriors, giving the order to depart. Hearing his words, the whole crowd rushed to the gates. Bjorn decided he would follow them for the time being, but wondered if they knew the way. Once among the village houses, the crowd of barbarians shouted, accusing the young warrior named Karnak of leading them down the wrong path, of being unworthy of leadership and of being held accountable. While the others were distracted, the young man slapped himself on the forehead, marveling at the barbarians' stupidity. How could they be better if they just ran silently the whole way? Karnak, however, did not object and agreed to give up his place as leader. A white-haired barbarian woman of athletic build came up behind him and told him that she would lead the group from now on. The crowd cheered Einar and were sure that such a wise girl would lead them to the right place. Soon she too became unwanted by the other warriors as she could not find her way to the labyrinth, admitting that she had gotten lost. Bjorn couldn't believe that this character class was so dumb. At this rate, they really wouldn't be able to get to the labyrinth in time. While the other barbarians were trying to decide on a new leader, he approached the girl and told her how to find the right path. Then the young man pointed to a small group of a human, several mages and a dwarf, advising to follow them. Einar announced that she knew the way to the labyrinth and ordered them to follow her. The entrance to the labyrinth was a huge purple orb that everyone called the portal of holy battle. In addition to the barbarians, members of other classes were gathered there. Bjorn pondered whether to enter it, and decided that no one would notice if he separated from the group for a while. Even aside from the fact that he'd spent most of his life in a hospital bed, he'd never hit anyone with his bare hands. The young man wondered if he would then be able to deal with the monsters that inhabited the labyrinth. And he couldn't avoid meeting the monsters because of the taxes. Taxes are another feature of Dungeon and Stone. They must be paid by every resident of the city over the age of 20, otherwise they will be executed. There are 2 ways to earn money, either by killing monsters or by getting a job, such as a tavern. The problem is that he is a barbarian, and other characters not unreasonably considered them clumsy savages and did not want to hire them. On top of that, barbarians were given good weapons from the start. Another problem was that the portal was opened only once a month, and there were only 10 minutes left before it closed, so they had to decide whether to survive in the city or fight monsters. However, the rations given by the leader would run out in a week. Even if he managed to survive for a month, his condition would be worse than ever. Einar interrupted his thoughts, asking him to enter the portal, which had already shrunk several times. The girl informed him that the others had already passed through, just the 2 of them. Bjorn told her to go first, and he would follow. The warrior thanked him for his help, asking how she could become as wise as he was. She had never met intelligent barbarians. Upon reflection, the young man tried to answer as simply as possible. He advised to think before doing anything. Einar thanked her comrade again, promising to repay him if they got out of the labyrinth. Bjorn wondered what he meant by, "if we get out of the labyrinth." He thought of the barbarians as fearless savages who were not afraid to fight monsters. He asked the girl if she was afraid of dying. Einar explained that of course she was afraid of death, but she was born a true warrior, so it would be a shame not to fight with her comrades. Suddenly Bjorn felt something in common between himself and her. They both have to fight to survive, so the girl, like her fellows, is learning to overcome fear. Inspired by the courage of his new fighting friend, the young man gathered his thoughts and ran towards the labyrinth. He realized that it had to be done, as there was no other choice. But unlike other barbarians, he not only had a strong body, but also the knowledge he had gained from playing thousands of characters. He was confident that he could survive in this world, so he jumped into the portal. The stat window reported entering a level 1 crystal cave. Looking around, Bjorn had no idea where he was. Part 3. He was an expert at playing Dungeon and Stone, so he came to the conclusion if you combined the barbarian's strong body and his knowledge of the game world, it wouldn't be difficult to embroider here. At least, that's what he thought at the time. As he looked around, he couldn't understand why it was so dark, since there should be crystals sticking out of the wall on this level, even a torch wouldn't be needed. But soon he came up with a guess. Perhaps this is the area of darkness, the rarest area at the very end of the labyrinth of the first level, where there is no source of light. Although starting points are chosen at random, so it's not surprising that something like this could happen. Before shifting, Bjorn decided to try calling up the status, information, or inventory window, but to no avail. Failing to get the desired result, he decided that there was no point in just standing still and walked forward. After a few meters it seemed to the young man that he was walking too slowly, and even thought about crawling, but then he could get. His thoughts were interrupted by a severe pain in his leg. Looking down, he was horrified to find that he was caught in a trap, a goblin's trap. However, it was impossible to make noise, so he had to be patient, as the goblins who set traps were usually somewhere nearby. Clenching his teeth, Bjorn opened the trap with his shield and freed the bloody limb. With no monsters nearby, he thought he was lucky, but he immediately chased those dangerous thoughts away. If there was a trap, there was definitely a goblin who had set it. If he hasn't shown up yet, then he's just hiding in the darkness, waiting for his victim to fall without strength. That's the logic of Dungeon and Stone, so you can't make too much noise. Right now, Bjorn decided to focus on what was important. It looked like the snare's teeth had been smeared with a paralyzing poison. Damn barbarians, couldn't they give normal leather boots instead of these sandals? He took off his shoes and felt the poison spreading. His right foot was already numb, so he should get out soon. Bjorn shouted into the darkness, ordering the monster to come out and fight. The poison seemed to have dulled his sense of fear, which was even better. He continued shouting, but there was silence in response. The young barbarian even began to think that he was just imagining it, and there were no goblins around. However, even if he looked like an idiot now, shouting at the entire monster family, it was better to be a living idiot. He felt as if he had drunk several liters of wine. Due to the prolonged bleeding, his sanity was beginning to cloud. Suddenly he heard footsteps behind him. The young man's guesses were confirmed, and although he couldn't see the goblin because of the darkness, he knew for sure that he was here. The barbarian took a few steps and heard his pursuer repeat after him. Then he stopped and heard no more footsteps, so the goblin is playing with the bloody prey, waiting for it to collapse to the ground. Now the monster did not even hide its laughter. Bjorn realized that he had to change the plan. After running a few meters, he pretended to fall down, expecting that the enemy would believe and come closer. The bastard was more cunning than most barbarians, however, and began throwing stones at the victim to make sure she was dead. Finally, cautious footsteps were heard. When he was sure the goblin was close enough, Bjorn lunged to attack, but it didn't reach him. But it felt like the new body was moving on its own, so a series of blows left the monster no chance, and the last one was fatal, pinning the enemy to the ground. After a few seconds, the corpse disappeared, and in its place appeared a small red crystal, the currency of Dungeon and Stone. Specifically, this one could be exchanged for a loaf of bread. Bjorn smiled, and he had gone through such shit for this. Now he realized that there were mazes and monsters that left behind valuable items, and outside there was a whole world where different races lived together. It was definitely Dungeon and Stone, which he knew perfectly well. But also the guy realized that he would never confuse the game with reality. Part 4. Bjorn tried to force himself to stop grunting, crawling like a dog with a wounded leg. There were two things that made him give up his dignity and crawl. First, his leg hurt less in this position, and second, all the traps were now right in front of his eyes, so he could move forward without risking getting caught again. On the monitor screen one after another warnings about the bleeding effect popped up. The young man's condition was getting worse and worse, and various thoughts kept popping into his head, preventing him from concentrating, for example, the fate of the guy who had been executed by the tribal leader, or the reasons for the ancient people's belief in various deities. Soon there was a warning about critically low health and risk of death. Bjorn decided that he was crawling in the right direction, as it was getting lighter and lighter, and someone there would surely be able to help. Suddenly, his own evil copy appeared in front of him, asking why the others should help some wounded barbarian. After all, he is not a beauty, but a mindless savage who is just a little stronger than a normal human. Bjorn realized that due to excessive blood loss, he was hallucinating. If this continued, he would go insane. The evil illusion was tempting him to give up, but the young man tried to chase the evil thoughts away and finally reached the corridor between the rooms. A small group of men were passing by. One of them drew the Drow Knight's attention to a bleeding barbarian. After examining the wounded man, Drow concluded that it was a newcomer. The young man was mentally angry at the young man's slowness, but did not risk voicing his displeasure. Finally, the knight smiled and asked the priestess named Erzina to cure the boy, but the girl flatly refused to fulfill the request. Then Drow said there was no choice and asked another knight named Patsran to share the potion. The latter objected that they were for emergencies. Drow promised to pay for it when they got out and also reminded him that his comrade still had plenty of those potions. Reluctantly, Patsran handed the vial to his friend. The knight then turned to Bjorn, warning that it might hurt a lot now, and poured the contents of the ampoule on the wound. Suddenly a searing pain engulfed the barbarian's entire body, even his bones seemed to melt. I could see why the game forbade the use of potions during combat. Nevertheless, after a few seconds, the pain stopped and the limb healed completely. Seeing Bjorn rise, Drow asked how he had managed to get to the dark zone before them, and whether the barbarian knew of any secret passage. Now the young man understood why he had been helped, but he replied that he didn't know. He just found himself here after entering the labyrinth. The knight thought he had heard of such an event, but the chance of it happening is so small that it happens only once every 100 years. Bjorn looked around the group and noticed a mage and a priestess among its members, which meant that their level was at least average, and he, being a novice, had experienced something they had never even seen. The Drow thanked him for the interesting story and told him not to worry about the cost of the potion. Time was considered money in the labyrinth, so it was already a miracle that it was spent on him. But he was glad to be saved, even though he felt humiliated. Pasran declared that this barbarian was very lucky. The Drow interjected, to which the young man explained that he had fallen into a goblin's trap. Such do not live long, so he was lucky to have met them. The archer coming from behind reminded him how the knight had hoarded the potions he had more than enough of, and then reminded him of the priestess's refusal to give up. The archer stood up for her silent friend, saying that she would have helped him if it weren't for the rules of the temple, and that he'd be better off learning from the Drow. The young knight asked if the Drow was the same one who had tried to learn the secret from the dying man. The archer countered that the man had done the right thing, for barbarians do not accept gratuitous help. Their conflict was interrupted by the Drow himself, telling them that they should turn into the cleft. It would be shorter than continuing on the barbarian's bloody trail. The archer praised the knight, calling him the best guide since he had memorized the first-level map perfectly. As they walked through, they saw a stone at the end of the room. Touching it would open a portal. Suddenly, the archer noticed the bloody sandal of a barbarian that was lying by the trap. The gray-haired mage said it was so and brightened the room, asking the Drow what was the approximate distance to where they had found the unfortunate man. The knight replied with surprise that it was at least 15 kilometers. The mage called the guy a real rabid monster. The archer asked Patsran what he was thinking about. The young man said that he didn't pay attention to it then, but now he recalled that the barbarian kept trying to hold out something in his hand, now he realized for sure that it was a crystal. All this time he didn't let it out despite his condition. It became clear that this wasn't just a newcomer or a lucky guy. This is a real psycho who doesn't give up, and no matter how painful it is, doesn't let the clutches of death even touch him. Part 5. After the first bad experience, Bjorn continued to bump into goblins, which were no longer a problem. The traps were set chaotically and not even hidden in any way, and the attacks of these monsters were predictable, as were the ambush points. The only problem was hunger. The warrior remembered the provisions given by the leader. However, the pouch with the necessary food was torn. It seemed that crawling on the ground was not the best idea after all. There was only enough left for 5 days out of a 7-day ration, so they would have to economize. Bjorn devoured the piece of bread with gusto, marveling at the unusual sweet taste. Although he was full, he was thirsty, and he didn't know where to get water. Dungeon and Stone had a starvation system. It only worked in a maze, but he never took water with him, as the mechanics only required food. But reality was many times harsher. Bjorn concluded that since no one had been given water, there must be a source somewhere in the labyrinth. After walking some distance, the barbarian finally heard the sound of water. Suddenly, near the source, he found another man in armor. He never met anyone else, not counting that troop with the mage and priestess. However, there was an unspoken rule: only interact with other adventurers when absolutely necessary. Bjorn laid out all the crystals he had gotten and counted them, and there were 44 of them. Of course, not dying after being trapped and poisoned was a miracle, but now there was a new problem: he was tired as hell. There were 2 ways to rest in the labyrinth: just go to bed, relying on luck, or find those who would guard you. No matter how many times he tried to negotiate with other groups to spend the night together, everyone was scared off by the prospect of spending the night with a barbarian who smelled like blood. Suddenly a surprisingly decent-looking man came up behind him, asking if the barbarian was looking for a companion for the night. Bjorn was confused at first, but the man said he was looking for a trustworthy companion to get a good night's sleep. In the game, the guy saw it as a sleepover with friends, but in person, overnight companion, sounded perverse. The traveler introduced himself as Hans, and in response Bjorn gave his name. The new acquaintance explained that it was better to gather in threes, but in the current situation they would only waste their energy trying to find someone else. So Hans suggested that they spend the night alone. What he heard seemed strange to the barbarian, but he assumed it was because of his strange way of speaking. Bjorn high-fived him in agreement and familiarity. Then Hans proposed to find out who was first to guard with rock, scissors, and paper. The man won, so it was agreed that he would sleep first. The man handed the barbarian a watch and, like a 6-year-old child, explained how to use it and when to wake him up. Bjorn was once again convinced of how stupid the barbarians here were. He wondered whether the experienced adventurers were behaving the same way or not. No goblins, no other living creatures. It was so boring that it seemed as if time went on endlessly. Finally, the hour hand reached the right point, and the young man woke Hans. The man asked if there was anything suspicious, and, hearing a negative answer, told his comrade to rest. However, Bjorn realized quite quickly that it would not be possible to sleep. How could he trust someone he met for the first time? He decided to check on Hans and pretended to snore like a real savage who had had a hard day. The man wondered if all barbarians were so strange and was glad that his watch was intact. Hans' reaction was easy to predict, but he had done nothing extraordinary, so instead of a 2-hour nap, he just lay there with his eyes closed. It was a shame, but it was better than being dead after all. He could not be trusted without being sure of his companion's reliability. Bjorn almost fell asleep again, but he was awakened by his partner, who laughed at the barbarian's willpower. Considering that nothing had happened, the man didn't swear. The young man apologized and said that he could guard some more as punishment, but Hans objected that he looked tired, and his turn to guard had passed. Bjorn thanked his companion and then lay down, but he struggled not to fall asleep. He offered help at the right moment, didn't scold him for sleeping at his post, and didn't even punish him for making a mistake. In a game he knew very well, such kind people simply couldn't exist. The barbarian opened his eyes when he heard a rustle and saw Hans bringing a huge war hammer over his head. Part 6. Bjorn reacted with lightning speed and dodged the sledgehammer's powerful blow, which would have turned his face into a pancake. The young man rose to his feet and assumed a fighting stance. But what amazed him even more was that Hans started making excuses for how stupid he thought the barbarians were. The shield blow sent the cunning bastard flying a few meters away. However, the man managed to get up and tried to explain himself again, but Bjorn attacked his opponent again, but he was so resilient that he was able to talk for mercy again. Then he gave him a chance and asked him why he had made an attempt on his life. The man explained that he didn't want to kill him, but just to knock him out in order to take his accumulated crystals and equipment, because the barbarians have good equipment even at the initial levels and it is easily sold. However, Bjorn was in no hurry to take his word for it, because killing an adventurer in a dungeon is a serious crime, so the reason must be just as serious. The young man kicked his foe and pinned him to the ground, asking one last time why Hans had tried to kill him. In desperation, the outlaw said that he wanted to get the heart of the barbarian. Now it was being used in new magic, so it was very expensive. Then Bjorn asked why the man hadn't tried to do it when he went to bed the first time. Hans said he had wanted to sleep too. The warrior marveled at the bastard's cunning, so he wanted to take full advantage of his potential victim. Suddenly the outlaw asked if the barbarian would let him go since he had told him everything. Bjorn smiled. He would meet hundreds of such crooks and criminals on his way, he could not forgive everyone. The barbarian swung his shield, ignoring Hans' pleas and suggestions. One sharp blow cut the man's life short. It had only been 1 day since he had appeared in this world, and he had already killed a man. At least now he wasn't like a savage. He drank water from a flask when he was thirsty, used a compass when he wanted directions, looked at his watch when he wanted to know the time, he treated his wounds with potions, he wore leather shoulder pads and boots for protection, and he had a hammer for attack. Funny how it was only by killing a human that he himself began to live as a human. Goblins disappeared with a single blow of the hammer. It was only now that Bjorn thought about the fact that perhaps he should have gotten a weapon from the beginning. He didn't know he could use it properly then, but it was like his body moved on its own, probably because he was a barbarian. Despite all the advantages he now possessed, the goblins had started appearing in pairs since the second day, and the clashes with them hadn't stopped since Hans had been killed. The young man wouldn't last long that way. He contemplated the idea of perhaps trying to take a nap without his nightly companion. As soon as he closed his eyes, the creatures would appear before 10 minutes had passed. He dealt with the next wave and tried to take another nap, but an intense pain overtook him. When Bjorn opened his eyes, he saw a goblin and a knife sticking out of his chest. It looked like he hadn't heard the little bastard. A second one appeared, but he immediately fled when he saw his comrade's head blown to pieces by the pressure of the hammer. The barbarian decided he urgently needed to rest, but the first thing to do was to tend to his wound. He poured out a couple drops and gritted his teeth, wondering why healing hurt more than getting stabbed. It had been another 14 hours since Hans had been killed, just the right time for adventurers to seek out nocturnal companions, but since the barbarian's heart was such a valuable resource, no one could be trusted. Suddenly the thought crossed his mind, what if he searched for other barbarians? As he searched, every group of people he encountered offered to join him, but he clearly decided he was looking for a barbarian, though he didn't know if the reason for this sudden interest was the heart or the fact that he no longer looked like a bloody savage. One of the archers told him that it was vain to try to look for other barbarians. Even those who had just gone through the ceremony had probably already passed to the second level. There were no more than 100 of them here. Bjorn wondered indeed, why with such a strong body he still remained at this location. The archer wished that Rapdonia favored the adventurer and went his way. The young man decided to change his strategy. In fact, he just needed a reliable companion, not necessarily a barbarian. He could be of any race other than human, preferably closer to his class elves, who always keep their word, or a little wild dwarves would be ideal companions. Basically, any non-human, because other representatives have distinctive traits, which does not allow them to attack their own kind. After an hour of searching with a new plan, Bjorn got lucky. He came across a wounded fairy. Part 7. Bjorn asked the girl if she was alone. She was alert and tried to fumble for her bow. No wonder any wounded loner would have done the same. She got up, but knelt down without strength. At that moment, the young man managed to spot an arrow sticking out of her belly. Suddenly the fairy began to beg for forgiveness and asked the barbarian to let her go just this once, explaining that she had a little brother left at home with no one to care for him. Bjorn hadn't expected her to be so spineless. All the Fae in the game were rather cold to other adventurers. The barbarian decided to release a smile to show that he wasn't going to hurt her. However, it only got worse because of her prejudices. The warrior's smile did not seem kind at all. The fairy thought that he was a real psycho who enjoyed killing. The girl cried out and begged for mercy more than before. He couldn't understand why everyone treated the barbarians as wild, empty-headed natives. Someone had obviously tarnished their image. Bjorn told the fairy that it was better to take care of the wound first and talk later. He handed her some healing richo leaves and a bandage. The girl couldn't understand why he was giving it to her, to which he countered that one didn't need a reason to help someone in need. Actually she did, but he wouldn't tell her that, and then added that he would watch her while she treated the sore. It didn't sound like much, but she might make a good night companion, at least she needed it even more. Wounded, tired, and eerily beautiful, she'd make a tempting target for unscrupulous adventurers, like Hans. Not a minute later, the fairy announced the end of the procedures. Noticing that she was now a little more relaxed, Bjorn decided to introduce himself by giving his name. The girl reciprocated, introducing herself as Erwin. The young man asked why she was so afraid of him. The girl explained that he was a barbarian and she was a fairy. Bjorn questioned what this had to do with it. Erwin told him that fairies and barbarians were hostile to each other. Now that was interesting in the game, these races treated each other normally. However, the girl quickly said that the war ended 10 years ago, so she has nothing bad for her new acquaintance and does not want to fight. Bjorn reassured Erwin, explaining that he was not hostile to fairies either. He then suggested that she become knight companions. Erwin hesitated. She knew that barbarians valued their honor above all else, so she asked to swear on it, and she herself promised to swear on the name of her tribe. Bjorn agreed and honored the request. The fairy did the same, giving her full name, Erwin Fornaxi de Tertia. Bjorn handed her the watch, telling her to be careful, for it was very expensive, spread a blanket and put his knapsack under his head. He decided to hang on for about 10 minutes just in case, but soon he felt Erwin pushing him in an attempt to wake him up. He couldn't believe it had been 2 hours already. It must be the magic combination of the blanket and backpack. If Hans had borrowed them then, Bjorn would have surely slept through his death. In that case, he decided to lend the items to the fairy so she could get a good night's rest too. He smiled as he watched the girl fall asleep before he could even lay his head down. She must have had as hard a day as he had. While on guard duty, all sorts of strange thoughts came to mind, such as what had happened in the old world. Maybe he was wanted. Though who could have come to him? In any case, even if there was a way to get back, it was impossible to use it now, so the young man chased these thoughts away, so as not to lose the will to fight. He decided that after a few repetitions of the dream he would have to go onward, so he wondered if he should offer the fairy to go with them. On the one hand, a quiet rest, but on the other hand, it would be necessary to share the booty, and given the fact that goblins began to appear in packs, it was possible to accumulate quite a lot of crystals. His musings were interrupted by a couple of people passing by. The fat one drew his friend's attention to Erwin's bow and quiver, saying that it was the exact same fairy. They asked the barbarian what his relationship with the sleeper was. Bjorn replied that they were nocturnal companions. Both of them laughed. Then the fat man inquired how long she would sleep. The question made the young man very angry, and he rose, growling that he was not going to answer it. Startled, the men turned around and walked away. Bjorn realized that these idiots were obviously looking for Erwin, so he tried to wake her up, but in response he heard a request to let her sleep for another 5 minutes. Part 8. Bjorn nudged his sleeping companion, but there was no way to wake her. When she hid her face under the blanket, he realized that the fairy was pretending and lifted her up, asking why she was doing this. Erwin explained that she didn't want the warrior to abandon her, as they hadn't agreed to become full-fledged allies, just for one night. Bjorn asked who the two men were that were looking for her. The girl said she didn't know, but assumed they were from the same clan whose members had tried to harm her. They called themselves the Crystal Alliance. The barbarian already thought that it was not worth getting involved with this fairy, but then he reminded himself that she was only 20 years old. After thinking it over, Bjorn told her that there was no time to waste, so they should go together for now. Erwin rejoiced and asked her companion if he would help her, but the warrior said he would listen to the details first and then make a decision. The fairy told her that she had met them recently, and they had become nocturnal companions. However, She opened her eyes when she felt something strange and found a man above her, licking his lips perversely. She managed to escape, and then she found out that he was the leader of the clan that runs the business on the first floor. His men started chasing her and once wounded her with an arrow. Bjorn didn't understand how they managed to track the girl down, but she suggested that maybe they were using communication stones to coordinate. The boy hadn't heard of these stones before, so he asked for more details. Erwin explained that they are mystical devices that can be used to send messages to each other. They act at a distance of about 300 meters. The guy realized that this is the analog of a handheld radio. There are more of them, plus they have means of communication, so if leaves her alone, the girl will definitely be captured. Bjorn asked what she had done to them. Erwin embarrassedly told him that she had swung her knife a little when she first escaped and accidentally hit the right place. The young man asked again, to which the girl said that he understood. It looked like she had even cut it off, so even potions wouldn't help. The barbarian realized that in that case they would haunt her for the rest of her life. Suddenly, Erwin ordered her friend not to look back as they were being chased. The distance was about 150 meters. It's very impossible to sense anything at that distance, but it didn't seem like the fairy was lying, probably an innate ability of her race. He asked if the companion could speed up. She answered in the affirmative. Bjorn was struck by Erwin's courage. Her wound could open at any moment, but she would not give up. The barbarian asked about the distance, but heard that the distance had not changed. That was bad. Besides, they must have already alerted the others. If he wanted to help her, there was no other choice. He would have to destroy them. But there was no turning back either, so he had to think about what he was risking and what he would get in return. Bjorn asked what Erwin was good at. The girl told him that she is not bad at archery and possesses spirit magic, fire attribute. An archer with one of the rarest magical abilities sounded good. The barbarian asked if she had killed before. Erwin said she hadn't, but was willing to do so. The young man liked what he heard and offered to join him before he left the labyrinth, the spoils being divided 9-1, and that was out of the question. Without further thought, the girl agreed. Bjorn asked one last time about the distance. About 100 meters. There was no point in running away anymore. He ordered Erwin to stop and summon a spirit, which illuminated the space around, and the friends saw that the enemies were approaching. Then the barbarian ordered the summoning to be cancelled, and the two hid in the darkness. Suddenly Bjorn saw one man making his way through the gloom. Suddenly he stopped right in front of them. He ordered Erwin to shoot. She took aim and released the bowstring. The arrow pierced through the boy's head. The barbarian got close to him and pulled the communication stone out of his hand. A voice from there tried to call out to Serdin, the name of the man who had just been killed. Then the voice gave up and announced a general assembly in the Goblin Zone. Part 9. The dead Serdin had nothing serious with him, just a bag of crystals, 2 daggers, and the leather armor Erwin was wearing. Her aura had changed along with the new clothes, for the better. Bjorn asked how the communication stone worked. The girl explained that there was a button to press. Following the instructions, the barbarian heard a voice announcing a reward of 10,000 gold pieces to the one who would track down and capture the fairy. Erwin was worried, but the young man calmed her down by telling her that they would now go to the portal to go to the second level. The companion asked if Bjorn was sure of his decision, as the first and second levels were very different. Of course, the young man knew that the place they were going to was much more dangerous, but as long as they stayed close to the entrance, they would be fine. On the plus side, their excellent combination of classes tank and ranged warrior, since they were now a pair, a maze with goblins was too easy a map for them. But even these words had little effect, which can't be said about the radio interception that followed, overhearing which the friends learned that the first one to catch the fairy would not only get gold, but also the opportunity to have fun with her, and if she resisted, she would even be allowed to cut off an arm or a leg. The only thing that made Bjorn happy about this radio program was its timeliness. Now he won't even have to persuade Erwin. Seeing the fairy's frightened eyes, the barbarian promised that he would not leave her alone. By nature, the guy was a man who would always help someone who was in danger, as long as it didn't hurt him. In this case he would have 2 benefits: first, the satisfaction of a good deed, and second, he would get rid of this dirty trash. Erwin asked if Bjorn knew the way to the second level. The young man explained that he didn't know the exact direction, but that if they went north, they would come to the right place. The maps are built in such a way that if you follow the edge of darkness, where they were walking at the moment, you will certainly come to a portal. With the help of the spirit that the fairy used to illuminate the dark area, the friends managed to spot the trap. Erwin said she would figure it out herself, and asked her companion to take a break. Bjorn asked not to use the spirit to conserve strength. The girl followed the advice, but just as she approached the trap, several goblins fell from above. The fairy oriented herself rather quickly, and the first arrow instantly pierced the head of one of the monsters. The second one tried to take advantage of the delay, during which Erwin was pulling another arrow out of her quiver, but it suffered the same fate. The barbarian was impressed by what he saw. The fairy was much more agile than he had expected, and her marksmanship and speed of reaction were amazing. Erwin handed 2 crystals to her companion, reminding him of the 9-1 sharing arrangement, and then told him that her little brother had asked her to buy something. If she tried hard enough, she would fulfill his request. Suddenly a message came from the communication stone again. The reward for the fairy was raised from 10 to 20,000 gold pieces, and it didn't matter if she was alive or dead, and then a voice added that she would go to hunt razor-haired wolves. Everyone who wished could take a break and do the same. What he heard seemed too strange to Bjorn. Everything was going too smoothly, and something bad must be happening to his luck right now. Suddenly Erwin shouted, drawing his companion's attention to the dead men ahead. Gully. He could not understand where they had come from, for they lived only in the south. They had not come this far to escape the chase. The girl offered to deal with them herself, but Bjorn objected. The system of gaining experience in Dungeon and Stone is also strange. You can get the cherished units only for the first kill of a monster of one kind or another, so it makes sense to explore the labyrinth completely to find as many creatures as possible to fight. The barbarian told his partner to get ready. He takes on the ones that are closer, while the fairy takes on the ones that are farther away. If they act like they do in the game here, they won't attack unless you get too close to them. The young man checked his hunch and rejoiced. With this they matched. The ghouls sprang from their seats and rushed toward him. They are faster than goblins, but their rank is still too low, so it is not difficult to anticipate their movements, and with a reliable companion, such as Erwin, even a pack of these carnivorous dead will not be a big problem. After 3 days of traveling north, they had almost reached the right room. At one point, the fairy drew her companion's attention to a trace of blood. After examining them, Bjorn concluded that it did not belong to a goblin. The friends were surprised that the trail led exactly where they themselves should have gone. Entering the room with the portal, the barbarian saw a bloody snare with a sandal lying next to it. Realizing that the portal was only a few meters away from his starting point, Bjorn lost his temper and struck the floor with his hammer, causing Erwin to jump. The frightened fairy immediately began to apologize, but the young man calmed his friend, explaining that she had nothing to do with it. After comparing all the facts, the bloody footprint, the sandal and the reaction of her companion, Erwin realized what was wrong and looked at Bjorn with regret. He hadn't expected her to understand so quickly, but the fairy had assumed that the barbarian's dead companion was in heaven. Well, he hadn't hoped for understanding. The young man asked if she was ready to move on to the second level. The twosome admitted that she was a little scared, but with him she was ready for anything. Her manner of inserting useless pathos phrases simultaneously amused the guy, but also seemed strange. The two friends jumped into the portal at the same time. Part 10. The friends flew a few dozen meters down and flopped to the ground. Bjorn always wanted to know what it felt like to go from one level to another. Actually, a bit shitty, like a giant frog first chewed him up and then spit him out with force. The girl was also surprised, because she had never fallen like that before after entering the portal, and the other girls had never told about such a thing, but thanks to her agility, her landing came out better. The boy said that first they had to figure out where they were. After looking around and seeing the huge trees, he concluded that they were probably thrown somewhere in the northern part of the goblin forest. Erwin was surprised she had never once been told about the forest on the second level. Bjorn assumed she had been told about a different second level. The first level has 4 portals that lead to 4 different zones. The north is the goblin forest, the east is the beast's lair, the west is the land of the dead, and the south is the dark rocky mountains. From each area of the second level, you can get to the third level. Bjorn asked his friend if she knew how to get out of the maze back to the city. The fairy remembered that they would be thrown out automatically when the maze closes. On the first level it would happen after 168 hours, and on the second level it would happen after 240 hours. Considering that the Crystal Union's teamwork is poor, they are unlikely to stick their heads up, so they only need to stay here for 168 hours. However, sitting around doing nothing for all that time is not an option, so Bjorn suggested walking around and looking around. Erwin said she felt nostalgic even though she knows this forest is filled with monsters, it still feels very much like the abode of fairies. Suddenly she told the barbarian to follow her step by step. There are a lot of traps here. Bjorn objected that he couldn't see anything. The girl picked up a pebble from the ground and threw it into a pile of leaves, and suddenly the trap slammed shut. It also seemed to be some sort of detection ability of her race, but the young man did not show surprise. Erwin became angry. Was that really all he could say? Bjorn said that there was no need to brag about trifles, he already considered her an experienced adventurer. These words brought a smile and flushed cheeks to the fairy's face. In the game, this place was also called Goblin Forest. Despite the presence of traps, it didn't mean they would be guarded at all, it was such a feature of this map. However, the monsters themselves became more diverse. Not only they appeared in groups of 10, so in addition to the usual ones, you could meet mutants, warriors, or even archers. The farther away from the portal, the more of them there were, not to mention the higher level monsters. Bjorn suggested to first deal with all the traps in the area and only then to expand the area of exploration, so that in case of danger it would be possible to quickly return to the portal. Some time passed in this way, until Erwin suddenly reported a group of goblins that were about 50 meters from their location. Bjorn asked how many, to which the fairy replied that there were at least 10. The barbarian asked how close they could get to them undetected. The girl said about 30 meters. Then the young man ordered to proceed as agreed. Without making a noise, Erwin walked forward, took aim and fired. Bjorn didn't know if she hit or not, as it was too far away, but he ran after her with his hammer raised. The goblins of the second level were much more dangerous than their counterparts on the first level. First of all, there were simply more of them, and secondly, in addition to the usual ones, there were also mutants. 5 was already a big problem. Suddenly, one of the monsters swung a dagger right at the barbarian's head. If he had reacted even a second later, he would have lost his eyes for sure. The goblin wanted to take advantage of the delay and kill the enemy, but his head was already on the arrow. Bjorn saw that his battlemate was in position, and decided it was time to finish. Part 11. At the end of the battle, they had collected 11 crystals, which was an impressive reward, considering that they had collected 44 crystals during the first level of the day. Although they had agreed to divide the spoils in a 9-1 ratio, the warriors' crystals were more valuable, so Bjorn gave his friend 2 instead of the usual 1. After hearing the words of gratitude, the barbarian ordered to move on. When the friends went beyond a 3-kilometer radius, opponents began to meet almost every 5 minutes. However, this wave of goblins also had an archer, who, by the way, was able to disappear. It seems to be a skill of camouflage. Of course, this one would be harder to deal with, but hardly enough to lose. To dodge an arrow fired by a goblin, it was enough to be attentive, so Bjorn ordered his companion to concentrate. The monster's archer took aim, but to his surprise he saw the barbarian dodge the projectile, and then with a sharp movement he threw back the enemy with his hammer. Finally, when the monsters were finished, the friends decided to take a break. The barbarian allowed Erwin to sleep first. The girl instantly fell into sleep. He had never seen her sleep so sweetly before. She must be exhausted or just feeling safe. In total, they fought for about 15 hours. They had managed to accumulate as many crystals as they had never dreamed of at the first level, but the further they went into the forest, the more adventurers they met. They walked in groups of at least 3, and there were representatives of different races. Each time they would just silently pass by, but he was getting more and more nervous seeing them. Adventurers are far more dangerous than goblins, especially now that he has someone to worry about. The main problem is that she's so beautiful. 6 days they spent at this pace. Finally the 7th came. Bjorn glanced at his watch and reported that it was about 2.5 hours until the first level closed. Erwin said she was very tired, so she would go to bed as soon as she got back. Suddenly, she told her companion to be careful, for there was a trap ahead. It looked like a new group of goblins had spawned. Erwin reported that 70 meters from their position there were 8 regular monsters, 2 warriors, and 2 archers. The goblins themselves were discussing something cheerfully in their own language, but suddenly an arrow pierced the head of one of them. The barbarian decided to start with the warriors while the fairy dealt with the archers. In all this time he had become a real master of such battles, and Erwin had already gotten used to it, knowing exactly how and at whom to shoot. The duration of the battles was also significantly reduced. Bjorn praised his friend for her excellent work, but asked her to let him know next time when the archers were done, so that he wouldn't have to think about them too. Erwin explained that she wasn't sure about killing the other one, so she didn't speak up. The barbarian praised her again, but mentally, because unverified information was more dangerous than no information at all. He even noticed that he was proud of her. Suddenly the fairy drew her companion's attention to a glowing thing that was hovering over the body of the stricken goblin. Upon looking at it, Bjorn realized that it was an archer's essence, another mechanic of dungeon and stone. It grants active or passive skills depending on the type. Although you could only absorb one per level, the essence could give something cheater, so it was valued by adventurers even more than some treasures. It seems the guy who was chasing them in the dark zone had absorbed the essence of the razorback wolf, so he found them by scent. The barbarian asked if Erwin wanted to take the item for herself. The girl said she didn't really want it, but as long as it wasn't useful to the barbarian himself, she wouldn't mind. Bjorn didn't care. He had long ago decided on an essence that would be useful to him, and the goblins was of no value to the barbarian. However, he said he wouldn't mind if Erwin fulfilled one condition they had agreed upon back at the first level. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a man from the group that had appeared here just now. He ordered them to stop, but the fairy did not want to obey and instantly devoured the prey. Bjorn knew that sooner or later he would have to face such people. They had rushed here as soon as they saw the essence. The insolent men had not expected such an act. The barbarian decided that since they were outnumbered, they should be more brazen, since their opponents clearly underestimated them. Taking out his hammer, Bjorn ordered them to attack if they wanted to fight, or to leave if they were afraid. Part 12. Bjorn ordered the fairy to run and not stop all the way to the portal. Erwin asked if he really thought that the four would chase them. The barbarian explained that even if they didn't chase them, there was still the risk of running into that group again. 4 was the perfect number to sweep the second floor, but they were hanging around at the very entrance, so they were probably planning to return to the city through the first level, just like that twosome. Erwin was surprised at her comrade's cleverness, but suddenly reported a group of goblins 50 meters from their location. Bjorn said it was better to go around this time, but the fairy objected that it wouldn't work, as the enemies were running straight at them. What he heard surprised the barbarian. Usually, goblins do not attack first at such a long distance. Bjorn ordered to change direction, but suddenly pulled his friend sharply away from the arrow. He realized that it was not the goblin who had fired, but those guys. It looked like they had baited the goblins and were waiting in ambush on the other side. They probably want to exhaust them first. Bjorn ordered to prepare for battle and use the power of essences. Each essence has certain properties. The one the girl absorbed belonged to an archer, so it increases stats and also gives a passive skill in the form of poisoned arrows and an active skill in the form of disguise, but the girl didn't know how to activate it. However, Bjorn said she already did. It seems you don't have to say anything to do it, just a wish. He handed her the backpack and ordered her to deal with the crossbowmen while he himself fought the goblins. Erwin asked if it was dangerous to go alone, but the barbarian said there was no time. Then he ordered to wait for the signal, after which it would be necessary to shoot the enemy shooter. There would be only one attempt. The girl wondered what the signal would be, but it was too late. The barbarian had fled to a decent distance. Those bastards did not show up, so Bjorn decided that they would appear after killing the goblins, which, by the way, there were at least 10. The barbarian thought that there would be no archers this time, but he barely had time to put his shield up in front of the projectile. The wounds were getting worse. Not only were the goblins coming at him from all sides, but he was also without Erwin's help. The barbarian's thoughts were interrupted by 2 arrows coming at him at the same time. Judging by the speed, one was fired from a homemade bow and the other from a crossbow. There was no way to dodge both, so the decision was made to defend against the crossbowman's shot. Not only did the goblin's arrow hit his elbow, but it was also poisonous, completely immobilizing the limb. Now it was necessary to choose what to continue fighting with. Now the main threat was the numerous monsters, so with the hammer could easily deal with them. However, the fight would probably take time, and without a shield it would be impossible to parry the crossbowman's attacks, so the choice fell on him. To the villain's surprise, after a few minutes the remaining goblins fled. The barbarian decided that there was no point in chasing them, it would be better to take a break, but the people who had come out of the ambush did not allow them to do so. There was no crossbowman among them, so he hid somewhere else. Bjorn ordered to attack, but the leader of the group was in no hurry to do so. On the contrary, he promised to let the barbarian go if he told him where the fairy was. The young man laughed. Did they really think he was dumb enough to believe their words? Then the leader ordered his men to attack, but to be vigilant even with his many wounds, the barbarian could still cause a lot of trouble. Bjorn's left arm didn't move, so he worried about the crossbowman. He should signal Erwin. It had to be unique to this world, one that definitely could not be mistaken. Suddenly the young man had a great idea. He smiled and raised his middle finger. Part 13. Bjorn and the leader of the group of knights clashed shields. The man gave a command to a samurai named Elias, and he tried to strike the barbarian in the open back with his sword. He barely dodged. This Elias was strong, but there was no retreating. He only hoped that Erwin had completed her part of the task. Suddenly, Bjorn saw an arrow flying in their direction, but couldn't figure out who had fired it until it hit the knight's shield. It was definitely a fairy. The leader ordered his underlings to concentrate on the barbarian while he dealt with the arrows. Damn bastard with a shield, it protects them from projectiles. Bjorn realized he couldn't handle them all at once, so something would have to be sacrificed. He'd have to use his left arm, which wasn't working as well as it should, but he could get the youngest of the knights out of the way. The one fell to the ground with force with a broken nose. The leader tried to block the arrow again, but suddenly it exploded. It looked like Erwin had used a spirit. The knight dropped his shield, and then a second arrow flew into his shoulder as well. The one on the ground grabbed his sword and ran towards the direction the archer had fired from, telling his comrades that he would deal with her. He had already run too far away, so the barbarian only had to believe in his friend. Bjorn tried to hit Elias, but he dodged, so his fist reached the knight's face, knocking him out. Now the samurai was left alone. He was very strong, so the young man wondered why he had decided to join the squad of these assholes, but he knew it was the worst mistake of his life. Elias continued to dodge the enemy's attacks, trying to buy time before the second knight returned, but that wasn't going to happen. The barbarian pretended to strike again, but it was only a deceptive maneuver, after which a shield flew at him, knocking the samurai to the ground. Bjorn grabbed him by the scruff of his neck with his working hand and simply sliced his throat, completely staining his chin in blood. After that, Erwin came up as well. Seeing her friend's wounds and signs of poisoning, she was scared out of her wits and advised him to drink the potion urgently. He didn't understand why he should drink it, but the fairy explained that the effect was much better than from external application. Having drunk the entire ampoule, the young man felt as if his insides were being boiled alive, but he tried not to show it in front of the girl. Erwin glanced at the clock. There were only 40 minutes left before the first level closed. There was no time even for rest. Suddenly, Bjorn ordered the fairy to take off her clothes. She blushed because of such a savory suggestion, but didn't want to do it in the middle of the forest, but the barbarian specified that clothes should be taken off corpses. But then he changed his mind, saying that at this rate they would not have time, so they should take at least the equipment, crystals and backpacks with potions. The girl said she would go get the items from the knight she had killed and come back. After finishing their business, they ran with all their legs to the portal. There was only 30 seconds to go when they jumped in. They were spit out again. Bjorn wondered how the girl managed to land so successfully every time. Suddenly she asked him about the essence. The barbarian asked again, to which Erwin reminded her that before she had absorbed the essence, he had something to say to her. The young man said there was no time for that now, better to talk about it outside. Suddenly he realized that they would be moved randomly, so a meeting place was needed. There were only 10 seconds to go. Bjorn kept trying to remember the name of the tavern. A couple seconds before the maze closed, he told his friend to come to the Black Whale Tavern. The girl made an affirmative sound. The information window announced the return to Rapdonia. Part 14. There were a lot of people gathered in the square, though usually it's not very surprising, since all the adventurers gather in one place, but today it was too much. Time flows differently in the labyrinth. No matter how long you stay there, you'll be thrown back to noon the next day, so you have to reset your watch every time, which Bjorn did. When he turned around, he saw the barbarian who had been stripped of his leadership while searching for the way to the portal. After a moment's thought, Bjorn remembered that his name was Karnak, the second son of Vannon, but the latter corrected him, not the second, but the third son. Soon several other members of their tribe came up, lined up around Karnak, listening to his tales of how the razor-black wolves were no match for his axe. Bjorn could not understand what this strange scene of reunion was, for they gaped at each other as if they were brothers separated in childhood, and where all these barbarians had come from. Suddenly one of them suggested to Karnak that they should have a duel of bravery, and he gladly agreed. Then they went to a local pawn shop to count the crystals they had accumulated. Karnak had the most, about 40,000, which caused his brothers to shout with joy. However, when they heard that Bjorn had gotten more than 180,000, they gave him the title of the best warrior, and when they saw that he had also managed to get a hammer and a backpack, they started chanting his name. He seemed to understand why they were so happy. He was the only barbarian who had gone into the labyrinth empty-handed and returned as a civilized man. Bjorn cheered and, smiling broadly, raised his hammer upward with shouts of being the best. The tribesmen picked it up and, still chanting his name loudly, began to toss it up. The owner of the establishment tried to shout to the noisy visitors, but to no avail. And passers-by began to avoid the building, having realized that now it is better not to go there. The barbarians were sprawled out on the benches, some yawning, some waving their arms, some picking their noses. Despite this, Bjorn decided to stay with them for the time being, for there might be some nuances he might not expect. Suddenly, among the crowd, he saw a familiar face and clothing, Erwin. She was surrounded by friends with snow-white hair and pointed ears. A light seemed to emanate from them. They seemed to be fairies, too. Bjorn looked around at the barbarians around him. He was even a little envious now. She noticed her friend too and waved her hand. The young man shouted back that they should meet at night. Suddenly Karnak asked if he knew that fairy. Bjorn said he didn't. The answer pleased the barbarian, who added that a better warrior would definitely not have messed around with those cowardly-eared creatures. That hurt one of Erwin's friends. A fight was not to be avoided if the last of the tribesmen didn't come out of the pawn shop. The young man was getting tired of the barbarians never keeping their mouths shut. He realized that it would be impossible to have a normal conversation in such an environment, so he told his wild-eyed companions that it was time to go. Suddenly he noticed that one adventurer's son ran up to him with joyful shouts. There was something similar about the game, too, the joy and happiness of families, and the despair and agony over their loss. He'd spent a lot of time in Dungeon and Stone, but seeing faces that used to be displayed in 2D on a monitor screen in person was somehow strange. Bjorn watched in amazement as the barbarians gulped down beer mug by mug. He followed them, so as not to miss some important step, but it looked like they were just going to get drunk, so he would only waste his time. Standing up from the table, Bjorn informed his companions that he had to go. Karnak saw the hero of the day about to leave and raised the alarm. The other barbarians wondered if he wanted to leave them behind. The young man was already afraid that they would start stopping him, but surprisingly, they only wished him good luck and continued having fun, even a little offended. What else surprised the guy in Rapdonia was the peaceful pace of the city. No monsters, no people to harm, law and order reigns here, so you can relax at least for a while. This city is definitely a lot wilder than the megacities of the 21st century, but it's peaceful, so living in it might not be so bad. Bjorn took a hot shower and lay down on the soft bed. But his head was troubled again. He couldn't fool himself that he wanted to go back to his world, even if no one was waiting for him there. He slept for about 5 hours and began to get ready for his meeting with Erwin. However, his expectations were almost shattered by a local who he asked for help with his search, telling him that the Black Whale Tavern had been gone for about 10 years. Bjorn asked what he meant by no. The man explained that the owner's son had gotten into debt because of his gambling addiction, so the place had to be sold. It's now called Fidenpus. It seems that the events of the game really did take place much earlier. Once in front of the tavern's entrance, the guy discovered that he could at least read the local writing and decided to visit the library or something sometime. It was pretty noisy inside the establishment, so Bjorn wasn't sure how he was going to find Erwin, but luckily she called out to him herself. Sitting next to her was the friend the girl had been with during the day. Bjorn asked who it was. Erwin's companion glumly introduced herself as her older sister and said the barbarian could call her Terja. He remembered that the fairy had given her full name at her oath, which meant that the new acquaintance asked to be called by her last name. The young man asked why she had come to their meeting. The girl jumped up and, slapping her hands on the table, asked why the barbarian had called a little girl to the tavern in the middle of the night. Part 15. The angry girl repeated the question why the barbarian had called her little sister to that trashy tavern last night. Bjorn didn't understand what "last night" meant and asked Erwin how much time had passed since they had returned from the labyrinth. The fairy replied that it had been 30 hours. Now he realized why he was so awake. He had slept for 24 hours. The young man awkwardly apologized to the girls, explaining that he hadn't woken up since leaving the labyrinth. Now Erwin was shocked. It seemed she had never seen the apologizing barbarian before. Terja coldly repeated the question a third time. He could have told her the truth, but he didn't, replying that if she wanted to know, she should let her sister ask her herself. Terja smiled and handed her companion a bag containing 350,000 crystals, the sum for the essence that Erwin had absorbed. The girl wondered why he didn't take it, assuming he had other motives for the night's encounter, and called him a filthy savage. Bjorn addressed his friend directly, explaining that he wanted to suggest that she form a group, at least until he herself had accumulated enough crystals to pay for the essence. Erwin jumped up from her seat with a smile, but looked at her older sister, saddened, and said she couldn't accept the offer. The young man could not understand why she refused. It seemed to him that they had become quite a good duo. Terja intervened, explaining that Erwin would now go on outings with her. They had only followed tradition that time, letting her go on her first outing alone. Now Bjorn understood it all. The family would sneak the girl into the upper levels. Terja said that if the barbarian understood everything, he could take the money and leave. After thinking about it, the young man said that 350,000 was only half, and they had agreed to divide the spoils 9-1, so there was still 280,000 crystals missing. The girl smiled broadly and said that she had completely forgotten about it, holding out another sack to her interlocutor. Now he began to understand why the barbarians hated these ears. Having taken the due amount, Bjorn said that he had finished business with Terja, so she could go, but he wanted to talk to Erwin alone. The girl started to get angry, wondering what they hadn't talked about yet. Her sister was calmed down by the younger one, saying that she just wanted to thank and say goodbye to the young man. Suddenly, Terja ordered Bjorn to swear an oath on the warrior's honor that he would not sleep with her sister, who, blushing, jumped up from her seat. The young man didn't care about the barbarian's military honor, but still he said what the strange fairy wanted to hear. With a smile, she headed for the exit, but suddenly turned around and thanked the young man for saving Erwin, finally addressing the barbarian by name. When Terja came out, Erwin collapsed on the table in shame. Covering her face with her hands, she explained that she had never spoken to her sister like that before. The girl then stood up and thanked her friend for the offer, but explained that they had made a pact long ago. Bjorn reassured her. In fact, he himself would not refuse if someone of a higher rank took him on as a team to go through the labyrinth at the higher levels. The fairy handed him a sack with 68,000 crystals left over from the group of bandits they'd fought before moving on to the city. She also said that the backpacks were at her house, but that it would be better to look at them in person, and added not to worry BJR, and she had already taken her share of the loot. The barbarian marveled at her friend's ability to grasp everything on the fly, not even needing to ask. It was a pity to let such a companion go. Erwin asked how he could thank his comrade for all his help in the labyrinth. Now he understood why Terja had ordered him to swear. She was afraid that the request might not be of the most decent nature. The young man said he couldn't think of anything to eat and suggested just a snack. The girl said she wasn't hungry, but she felt embarrassed to refuse, so she stated that she had purposely not taken anything in her mouth or a drop since yesterday in order to drink a return with her friend. Upon reflection, the guy remembered that there was indeed such a tradition in the game, but it would probably be difficult for a fairy who had spent her entire life in the abode. She said it was the first time for her, but was very surprised to hear that the barbarian had also never drunk the return before. He hadn't lied about his age or his first trip to the labyrinth. After drinking a few mugs, the friends were pretty well winded. Erwin noted that Bjorn had come in a very short shirt today, and the young man said the same thing about her skirt. After drinking some more, he got up from the table and said there was one way she could thank him. The girl blushed, but didn't object. Part 16. There were screams coming from Bjorn's room. They were not cries of pleasure, however, but of terrible pain. The barbarian was trying to flex her arm as much as possible. When he finished, he concluded that the increase in flexibility by 4 wasn't very noticeable in real life. Erwin objected that she hadn't come here to test the characteristics, but the young man explained that he wanted to see the difference in essence effect between the labyrinth and Rapdonia, since you can't use skills in the city. Dungeon and Stone never spared its players. It was enough to look at the status window to realize that. Strength, spirit, and abilities are the 3 basic stats, but here were hundreds of additional effects in drop-down lists that took a guy thousands of hours to learn, like stamina, which allows you to carry more stuff in your backpack and deal more damage with physical attacks. Thanks to these mechanics, playing characters with the same basic characteristics felt different. However, even in 9 years, he still couldn't get the gist of some of the effects. For example, the possession boost Erwin received along with the essence. The only thing he knew about it was that it was in the spirit branch. With a sweet smile, Erwin offered to do something else, but the barbarian interrupted her, asking if she had felt anything strange after leaving the labyrinth, such as intrusive thoughts or intemperance. She thought about the cookies and remembered that she hadn't really liked them before, but she'd eaten a whole bunch of them since she'd come back. Bjorn assumed that the obsession increased the desire, but decided to watch just in case something else happened. His musings were interrupted by Erwin, who sleepily announced that she wanted to lie down. He put out the candle and was about to close his eyes, but he remembered Terja's promise not to sleep with her sister. Though he assumed she meant a different sleep. In the morning, the fairy showed him the equipment he'd gotten from that gang of humans. She realized that he would probably want to sell most of it, so she asked permission to keep the leather suit. Bjorn didn't object. The pawnbroker's trip ended very well, with almost 1.5 million crystals for everything. If we subtract Erwin's share, it would be exactly 1,400,000. A smile shone on the barbarian's face, a great strat. Seeing the fairy's face saddened by the fact of parting, Bjorn decided to walk together to the central square. A large crowd had gathered around the guillotine. The young man asked his friend what was going on here. Erwin explained with horror that the execution was probably starting. These unfortunates have committed no serious crimes. They have not killed, raped, or robbed. They are guilty only of not paying taxes. Rapdonia is the last city to suffer from the witch's curse. The only place where it is possible to obtain resources is the labyrinth. Those unable to do so will be executed to reduce the number of mouths. Suddenly, a few guys in rags ran up to the guillotine, pushing the people gathered, and began to dip their bread into the pool of blood, after which they ate the delicacy with gusto. The fairy asked her friend why they were doing this. Bjorn explained that according to the beliefs, the blood of the executed brings financial luck. The amount of the tax increased every year. The first year it was 700,000, the second year, 800, and they also took a commission when exchanging, so it was impossible to stop training. The boy clearly understood that if he didn't find a way to return home or become stronger, his blood would also end up on someone else's bread. The young man decided to visit the library, which the developers had yet to complete in the game. The readers looked at him strangely. It seems they were not used to seeing a book-loving barbarian. Suddenly, at one of the tables, he saw a girl snoring, sprawled out on the table. It was Einar, the warrior whom Bjorn had helped to find the way to the labyrinth, thus keeping her in the lead. The barbarian woke the tribeswoman, who cried out in joy when she saw her little brother, as she called him. Bjorn tried to persuade her to keep her voice down, but then abandoned the futile effort. The young man asked what she was doing in the library. Einar reminded him of the advice to think before you do anything, so she decided to gain new knowledge. That's commendable. She seems to be different from her brethren. The warrior said she had also realized that it wasn't just monsters to be wary of in the labyrinth. Bjorn assumed that a lot had happened to her. Einar confirmed the hunch, explaining that that was why she had come here. However, reading was proving to be very difficult, so she wants to go to the temple, where she will be taught how to read and write. The young man asked if she intended to do that right now, to which the warrior said that if she put it off for later, she might forget. The lad noticed that the more he learned about the barbarians, the more he felt sorry for them. Lastly, Einar reminded him of her promise to thank the young man for his help and advice. The girl said that if her friend had any problems, she should come to the Furious Bull Tavern. Bjorn hoped she wouldn't forget about it in a couple days, as he would probably need her help for sure. The library turned out to be truly huge, so the barbarian wasn't sure how he was going to find the book he needed. After a short search, he decided to ask the librarian. It turned out to be a pretty girl, who, by the way, fell asleep on the job. Bjorn coughed to wake her up. She raised her head languidly and also languidly asked how she could help. Part 17. The young man asked how he could find the history book, but suddenly the girl cast a spell and said to wander around and the book would be found. You could read it as much as you wanted, but you couldn't take it with you. Bjorn wanted to ask another question, but the girl passed out again. Walking around a bit, he realized how her magic worked and the right book began to glow on the shelf. Now it was clear how one person kept track of such a huge library. Bjorn found the right place and began reading from the first book, The Fallen World. For thousands of years these lands have been under the curse of an evil witch and uninhabitable. Rapdonia is the last fortress to escape the catastrophe. The ruling family opened a path to another dimension for people who were dying due to lack of resources. This is what is called a labyrinth. Guy noticed that this story felt like the prologue of a game. The second book, Basic Notes of Alchemy, talked about turning magical monster crystals into bread, water, steel, and the like. Bjorn didn't understand much of it, but he decided to memorize it just in case, because such information would probably come in handy in future raids. The third book was called Holy War and told about the reasons for the enmity between fairies and barbarians. This is, of course, very interesting, but the fourth seemed the most useful to the guy, Evil Spirits of the Abyss. Evil spirits in this world are those who come from another dimension to take over someone else's body. The reasons are not described, of course, but purely technically the wording is correct. And, from what I've read, the ruling family in the church have gone to great lengths to get rid of the phenomenon. Simply put, as long as it doesn't give itself away, everything will be fine. The fifth book, The Immortal King, tells about the first ruler of the dynasty, who, strangely enough, was called Immortal, Revision 3. The game just started with his death, so 150 years have passed since then in this world. Now I see why there are occasional inconsistencies. The next book was called On the Instability of Dimensions. It seems that this is what the Drow Knight was talking about when he mentioned that a starting point in the darkest zone is a very rare occurrence. However, the book said that going through a portal during the closing time could cause instabilities. After finishing it, he decided it was too late and went to rest. 3 days later, Bjorn remembered that the portal opened every 30 days, which meant that the next raid was 27 days away. The young man decided that from tomorrow he should start looking for companions. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a heavy knock on the door and Erwin's shouts. As soon as the owner of the room appeared on the threshold, the girl hurriedly announced that she had managed to conclude the contract. She had spent the 10 spirit stones given by her sister and was able to master wind as well, which, by the way, combines perfectly with fire. Spirit stones are items that allow you to make a contract with a particular spirit. There's about a 10% chance of that happening. They are quite expensive, and the fairy spent as much as 10, she probably comes from a rich family. Bjorn congratulated his friend on the contract, but wondered why she had taken the time to come here. Wouldn't it have been better to prepare for the descent into the labyrinth? The girl agreed, but explained that she wanted Bjorn to be the first to know. She seemed to think of some special bond between the first companions. And while the guy was in favor of a purely working relationship, he was planning on still living here for a while, so it was better to have a good connection. Turning on all his charm, the young man offered the fairy to stay friends and said that she could turn to him for help at any time. The next day, Bjorn decided to stop by the Angry Bull Tavern. The crowd of barbarians standing at the entrance of the building raised a ruckus again when they saw the same Bjorn, son of Yandel, who had taken the most crystals out of the labyrinth. One barbarian could create enough to make blood come out of his ears, and there were at least 5 of them. One of them asked why the hero had come here, if it was to live here. He was told that they charged only 300 crystals a night. Bjorn wondered why they charged so little, but the guide explained that the 10 of them slept in a room with 5 beds. The young barbarian asked for Einar, but she came out into the corridor, greeting her brother, and asking about the purpose of the visit. Bjorn informed her that he wanted to fight her for training. The girl said there was no point in wasting such a request and led the way to the backyard where the other barbarians were already fighting each other. Einar said she was willing to train any time except early morning. In that case, Bjorn offered to start right away. The crowd cleared the area and waited with interest for the upcoming fight. Although the young man had come here to train, he certainly did not intend to lose. Bjorn struggled to get up from the ground. The crowd chanted the warrior's name, declaring that she was now the best warrior, a resounding defeat. Followed by another, and another, and another, it went on like this until the evening. Einar said that if he wanted to continue she should take a break, but the young man was exhausted himself, so he declined the offer. He liked the warrior very much because she was different from other barbarians in her intelligence and cleverness. She would not betray him in a difficult moment, but her strength and fighting skills also made her an excellent assistant in battle. In general, Einar was an ideal companion. Bjorn offered it to her directly, promising to cover the cost of setting up the team and preparing the equipment, but in return he would take 80% of the loot. No sooner had he finished than the girl squeezed his hand, saying that she wouldn't understand if he explained further anyway, but was ready to just trust. The next day the two came to the temple of the barbarians. There they were greeted by the leader of the tribe, the same shrieking grandfather who had killed the other evil spirit. Bjorn really didn't want to come back here because of him, but there was nothing to do. He didn't seem to be in the worst of spirits today, so he greeted his friends, praising them for coming back, since few barbarians want to learn anything other than martial arts, like reading or writing. However, Bjorn explained that he had come here today for a different reason. He needed a spiritual seal, or rather, the seal of an immortal. Part 18. The non-human races have their own peculiarities. For example, fairies have a contract with spirits that allows them to borrow their power, dwarves have a blessing of armor that makes equipment more effective, and barbarians have a spiritual seal. The leader grabbed Bjorn by his clothes and pulled him to him, ordering him to answer how he knew about spiritual seals, since younglings like him usually don't know about such things. The boy realized that he was suspected again, but he was ready for such a development, so he didn't even have to lie. Bjorn explained that he was in the library and learned that this ability helped the barbarians a lot during the war with the fairies. He smiled again and slapped the young man on the back in a friendly manner, saying that he was proud of him and Einar for their passion for knowledge. He then added that there was no reason to refuse, but that he would need to pay the sum of 800,000 crystals. The girl looked at her mate in surprise, asking if he was really going to do that. At the initial levels, it was very difficult to earn such an amount, so the girl's surprise was justified. And at higher ranks, rare materials would be needed as well. But right now, he had the money. The chief asked how the young man managed to earn so many crystals. He, by the way, had already come up with a wonderful excuse. It would have been even sad if the question had not been asked. Bjorn said that he had found a wounded fairy in the labyrinth, made her his slave and took all the loot. Then gave her the essence, and made her sister pay upon his return. The story caused a fit of laughter and cheers not only from the man, but also from the young barbarians gathered around. The chief even made a gift and returned 200,000 crystals, not bad for an ordinary tale. Bjorn got so into character that he threw his fist upward, shouting the uselessness of these long-eared creatures. Spiritual seal is a kind of amplification technique. The point is to fill the body with special ingredients that will give a special power. Barbarians tattoo their children when their soul is still pure, so that its paths can be seen even after growing up. That is why everyone has them. An advanced spiritual seal of an immortal is the main prerequisite for a barbarian tank. The others are definitely very useful as well, but for those who played a long game, it was the seal of the immortal that was the best option. However, applying it in reality proved to be much more painful than on the monitor screen. If it was only a level 1 seal, it looked like this kind of sensation would have to be experienced every time. The next morning, Bjorn went to the shopping district to buy the necessary equipment. Thanks to his training with Einar, the young man realized that a sword was not the right weapon for him. Besides, he was planning to focus on learning shield fighting techniques anyway, so it was useless to waste time on a sword. Bjorn turned to the shopkeeper to help him choose a blunt one-handed weapon. After pondering, the man pointed to a display case that was very popular with barbarians. The young man familiarized himself with the assortment. The power was certainly devastating, but it would be overkill for first-level monsters. He asked for something simpler. Then the seller offered to take the mace. After holding it in his hands for a while, Bjorn realized that he could not find a better weapon, so he chose this one. Then he bought a rigid half-armor and a custom helmet, because he couldn't fit into the usual one. When the barbarian bought everything he needed, he had 50,000 stones left on hand. A lot of time has passed since leaving the labyrinth, so city life has become routine. At 7 in the morning he gets up and has breakfast with Erwin, then sits in the library until 4 in the afternoon. After that he goes to eat at places he hasn't been before to learn information he can't find in books. Around 5 he goes to the barbarians. In a week of training he has begun to fight more than just Einar, who, by the way, he sometimes manages to defeat. She is certainly skillful, but her movements are predictable, a habit that is unlikely to be easily corrected. Then about 9 o'clock Bjorn comes home, washes himself, and dines again with Erwin. The meal is over by 11, and the fairy goes to her room. Thus the month flew by, only 24 hours remained before the opening of the labyrinth. In the evening Bjorn and Einar came to the Adventurers Guild. The barbarian asked the girl at the reception desk for a magical connection for 2. After calculating, she concluded that the service would cost 15,000 crystals. It was a bit expensive for a one-time thing, but it was necessary, because the starting points were determined automatically, and the magical connection would help to be in one place. Lastly, Bjorn ordered the most expensive dinner in the tavern for 800 crystals. His companion was surprised to see the table piled with meat. She gorged herself on the treats and said that she would try to earn more gems so that she could eat like that all the time. Soon they were both standing at the entrance. It was 10 minutes until opening time. Bjorn hadn't paid attention that time, but the portal appeared to be really huge. Suddenly he heard a noise and the praise of someone's name. He immediately realized it was the barbarians. Apparently they had just gone through the ceremony. The young man wondered how they had managed to find their way in and arrive on time. Finally, the entrance opened, and Einar told her companion to enter. But Bjorn asked her to wait. He wanted to see if the situation would repeat itself if he went in again just before closing time, which was 1 minute away. The portal began to narrow, which made the girl nervous, but the young man waited for the guard to say that the entrance was about to close. Finally, the desired word sounded. Bjorn grabbed his friend's hand, and they jumped in together. He was right. The friends found themselves in a dark area, but this time he took a torch with him. A few meters ahead, a stone stood against the wall. The guy smiled. Every gamer should know how to use bugs in his favor. Part 19. The information window announced that the barbarians had been awarded additional experience points for opening the portal first. Einar marveled at how quickly they had managed to get to the second level, for the chief had said it would take at least 3 days. Bjorn told her that he had read about it in a book, for which he complimented her on her intelligence. The silence around them and the raven's heartrending cries made it clear that they had entered the lands of the dead. Suddenly the young man felt something strange, as if something was rushing up through his veins. Einar assumed it was an increase in spirit, that is, an increase in level. Dungeon and Stone had its own leveling system. The mana needed to use skills and the amount of essences that could be absorbed increased with level. When hunting, the experience needed to level up is given for the first kill of a monster of a particular species, so it's harder to move up each time. However, there is one more way to do this, to spider the maze. Points for opening portals are given every time. However, in any case, soon there will be more experienced adventurers here, to whom it is better not to reveal all the secrets. Bjorn turned to his companion to tell her that they've been traveling here for 2 days. If anyone asks about it, now she definitely won't blab. In the lands of the dead, there are monsters more dangerous than goblins, but there are no traps, so you can go wild. In general, the ideal location for 2 barbarians. Suddenly Einar noticed a few ghouls ahead of them. There were only 3 of them, probably because it was the first day. The girl said she was tired of wandering around idly, so she would deal with the obstacle herself. Not a minute later, all the dead people were lying on the ground in pieces. Suddenly, Einar instantly turned back to Bjorn when she heard an ominous scream. The young man explained that it was the towers. They didn't attack unless disturbed, so there was nothing to fear. The attacks wouldn't work anyway. If they attacked first, they would get a curse, so it was decided to go around the creatures. Suddenly the warrior shrieked and grabbed Bjorn by the neck, seeing the skeletons ahead. The barbarian barely got free, saying he would deal with them himself, but Einar had already bared her weapons. Bjorn wanted to give a hint to the girl to hit the core between the ribs, but before he could say anything, the first monster had already blown apart. After that, they walked north for about 8 hours, meeting a variety of monsters, among which were scary ghouls that were twice as big as usual, skeleton archers and skeleton warriors. There weren't many of them, so there were no special problems. The mace was perfect in weight and size, so the skulls of the creatures were broken several times more efficiently. The vest-shaped armor reduced the area that needed to be covered by the shield, which made fighting more aggressive. The steel helmet, of course, is unlikely to withstand a crossbow shot, but it copes perfectly well with corpulent skeleton bows. On top of all this is a battlemate, who is definitely not inferior to him in characteristics. Bjorn used to be surprised by her way of shouting the name of the ancient barbarian goddess Vachella during every attack. But after trying this technique firsthand, he felt incredibly relieved. Now he was sure that the barbarian team was something. During the break, Einar noticed a wound on his comrade's arm, but he reassured her that it was almost healed. The immortal seal improves natural regeneration and stamina. For example, a cut half a centimeter deep heals in just a minute. The pain is incredible, but the effect is worth it. Suddenly, Bjorn felt the ground become drier and the tower's screaming intensified. It could only mean one thing: the 8th rank monster was about to appear. Before he could even finish speaking, a huge creature with 3 red eyes, a death demon, appeared right in front of them. The barbarian realized that he had to divert the monster's attention to himself while Einar tried to deliver a precise blow to its head. It was the only way to defeat it. He slammed the mace into its body and felt a strong recoil, as if he had struck a rock. Everything went according to plan, but soon there was a significant problem: the sword simply did not enter the demon's head. Of course, in the game he had a high defense, but Bjorn could not imagine that it would be so difficult. The blade scratched the monster's neck only a little, and the wound healed in 3 seconds, similar to the passive skill, body preservation. But soon the demon demonstrated the active one as well, calling of ghouls. Bjorn ordered the girl to get ready, it would be much harder now. Part 20. Bjorn ordered Einar to deal with the ghouls while he distracted the demon. Within seconds the young man was blocking the huge monster's attacks with his shield, and soon he heard the message that the dead men were finished. Einar tried to pierce it with her sword, but was unsuccessful. Although it failed to harm him, the demon shifted its attention to the girl, leaving the back of her head exposed, which the barbarian took advantage of. A powerful blow with the mace opened up the bleeding, which infuriated the monster even more. He swung his arm with such force that Bjorn flew several meters backwards. If he hadn't put up his shield, his ribs would have been forgiven. He was beginning to think about giving up the hunt and returning to the lower-ranked monsters, but he saw Einar take a moment to grab the demon's leg when it was in the air. He thought it was a great idea to throw him off balance. It was odd that a barbarian would even think of such a thing, though this particular one stood out from the others. With a clatter, the demon collapsed to the ground. After so much wasted energy, the two friends were amused by the big man's unsuccessful attempts to get up on his own. With the same satisfied smiles on their faces, they threw deadly blows at him. A large magic crystal appeared in the place of the vanished corpse. Bjorn explained that it was worth only 100 ordinary, a small reward indeed. Einar asked how much that wonderful cream pie had cost. The young man replied that 3 crystals were just as much as they had gotten for killing the demon and his goons. The girl got excited and said that there was no time to sit around. He had more fun with her than with the passive fairy, though Erwin was dear to him in his own way. They met 70 more death demons along the way, as they saw one, grabbing them by the legs and then hitting them over the head. Bjorn especially benefited from killing them by getting a chance to drop an essence with pretty good properties. The next day, these huge monsters appeared in pairs. The way to deal with them was already known, so it was easier than expected. But after noon, they began to appear in groups of 3, which was too many even for barbarians like them, so the demon hunting stopped. In the evening the friends found a wonderful place to sleep, but soon a group of people came there. Einar gave them a stern look and ordered them to get out if there was no business to be done. In fear, the knights turned around and ran away. Considering the way she treats and had treated people last time, something must have happened to her in the labyrinth. Bjorn didn't bother to ask now, but decided to be sure to do so later. The girls said that they knew their location now, so they'd better make camp farther away from here. For a while they wandered around looking for a suitable place, but suddenly they heard cries for help. The guys realized that such sounds do not make those who are attacked by monsters. It could only mean one thing: the adventurers are killing each other. They broke from their seats and ran to where the pleas were coming from. Soon the camp appeared before them. There were 4 corpses on the ground, and a girl standing beside them, completely covered in armor, holding a bloody dagger in her hand, a marauder. Part 21. Marauders. People who are in the business of preying on other adventurers. Instead of collecting magic crystals and equipment from slain monsters, they do it at the expense of their colleagues. Of course, in Rapdonia, such a crime is punishable by death, but on the other hand, no one convicted Bjorn for killing 6 adventurers, even though it was self-defense. Outside the labyrinth no one would know anything, unless of course there was no one to tell. The girl who stood before them was tall and trim, with shoulder-length red hair, a torn right ear, and a tattoo under her eye. With such attributes, she simply had to be famous, but since she wasn't, she must be insanely good at what she did. Simply put, she never leaves witnesses. Bjorn turned his attention to the 4 corpses behind the marauder. Judging by the rather high-level equipment, they reached at least the 5th floor, plus there was a mage among them. 3 of them had no visible wounds, and the froth from their mouths indicated poisoning. It looked like one of them was immune, so they had to deal with it the old-fashioned way. Bjorn asked the outlaw if it was her team. The girl replied that they probably thought she was their friend. Then she calmly turned her back to the 2 barbarians and began to search the bodies, seemingly unafraid. The young man realized that they could not cope with such a strong opponent, so he ordered his partner to run as fast as possible. At the moment it was the only way to survive. They managed to buy some time, but it was unclear when the criminal would give chase. Just in case, Bjorn left notes on the trees so that he could quickly return to the portal to the 1st level. Suddenly the barbarians came across a squad of 4 men. Trusting them was a questionable decision, but there was no choice. The young man explained the situation and asked for help. The bald man in armor drew his dagger and asked what guarantees they had that they were not marauders themselves. Bjorn swore on the warrior's honor, once again convinced it was a cheater's trick. The bald man then stipulated that if the marauder was killed, his team would take all the equipment. The barbarian said no problem. The man then revealed that he was using the gnome's skill to hide the twosome. The gnome's skill makes everyone within a 3-meter radius blend in with their surroundings, a very powerful camouflage ability. The only downside is that you can't move, but it's a good price to pay for avoiding a suicidal battle. After finishing his sorcery, the man smiled, saying that he had been very lucky in that the 2 barbarians had fallen into the trap themselves. Now Bjorn realized that they had been tricked. These bastards had turned out to be marauders themselves. It was impossible to resist or move at all, for the spell cast by the man was not a skill of the dwarf, but an effect of the stone golem. To break it, one must take at least the slightest damage. The squad members looked at the spoils the barbarians had accumulated in 2 days with satisfaction. One of them complained that they had finally managed to catch a woman, but she was just a common savage. Another said it was for the best, reminding them how much barbarian hearts cost on the black market. Soon they decided to get down to business and one of them drew a knife. Just before the stab, a plan matured in Bjorn's mind: prepare himself lightning fast and tilt his head back before the blade entered deep enough into his neck. He prepared himself and, waiting for the leisurely assassin to bring the knife up, he lashed out as soon as he started to move his hand. Everything went according to plan, and one of the outlaws was already lying on the ground. Bjorn then grabbed his knife and threw it at Einar to regain her ability to move as well. The girl picked up her weapon and ran towards the humans. A few seconds of fighting and the 3 hapless marauders were finished. However, the bleeding from his neck made itself felt and Bjorn collapsed to the ground. Einar had already begun to mourn him, giving the bald squad leader a chance to flee, but the young man struggled to get a word in edgewise and reminded his friend of the potion. They examined the wound. Surely a scar would remain. Bjorn rejoiced at his idea to buy the immortal seal. Without it he would surely die. Einar was even a little pleased, considering it some kind of achievement. The boy thought about it and also came to the conclusion that few barbarians managed to survive a neck wound, no matter how big you were. He then assumed that the man couldn't have run far, so we should capture him. Not a few minutes later, the criminal was already in Einar's hands. She was about to finish him off, but Bjorn stopped her, reminding her of the gnome's skill needed to hide from the marauder more forcefully. Suddenly a dart flew into the bald man's neck, causing him to gasp for breath as he convulsed. It looked like the tip had been poisoned. Turning around, the barbarians saw the same outlaw who had killed the 4 adventurers. She praised them for their fine fight. Bjorn realized that the outlaw had been watching the whole time, so if they couldn't escape, they would have to fight. Part 22. The friends rushed into battle. Bjorn swung his sword, but the girl dodged again, so he decided that if he couldn't knock her down, he would push her. Bjorn swung his sword, but the girl dodged again. He decided that if he couldn't throw her down, he would push her. The barbarian grabbed his opponent, but in the same second he fell without the slightest opportunity to move. She was hit in the back, piercing the armor with a regular knife. Einar tried to attack as well, but was struck in the stomach and fell down, letting her mouth bleed. Their opponent outmatched them in strength, speed, yes, in everything. Would they really meet their end here? The marauder told the young man not to even try to move, as the basilisk's paralyzing poison was already spreading through his body, but suddenly promised to spare the barbarians' lives if they promised not to tell anyone anything. Einar warned her friend not to trust this outlaw, but she explained that she owed a debt to the barbarians, so she simply could not take the lives of any of them. Now Bjorn understood why she hadn't intervened in a fight. She wouldn't have had to do anything if those jerks had handled it. Somewhat doubtful of the girl's promise, Bjorn nevertheless swore on his warrior's honor to keep his mouth shut. Then the outlaw turned to Einar, but the latter refused to swear an oath. The criminal said she had no other choice and swung for the fatal blow, but Bjorn stopped her and ordered her to fulfill the condition. She tried to refuse again, but he reminded her of her agreement to obey and repeated the order. Not daring to disobey and resist someone she read as much smarter than herself, the female barbarian also promised not to tell anyone anything. Then the marauder kept her promise as well, helping her friends up. Bjorn asked her what floor she was from. The girl said she was from the 8th. The young man realized that if she was really an adventurer from the 8th floor, only her debt to the barbarians could save them. But mentally he promised that next time it would be different. Soon they were spit out onto the first level of the maze. Einar landed flat on the stone floor, where she lay for several seconds. Bjorn asked if she was all right. The girl replied that she was in pain, but since she was no longer a warrior, she couldn't complain. It was much worse than the guy had expected. He wondered why begging for mercy with the honor of a warrior was so shameful. Upon reflection, he explained that only the strongest warriors could survive and become stronger, so they had a chance to prepare and take revenge on this criminal next time. Einar stood up and said that she didn't understand anything when the young man talked a lot, but this time was different. She thanked him for his support and said she would endure the shame and desire to kill herself to become a glorious warrior like him. They had been up for 20 hours, and although the guy was mentally destroyed after today's events to the point where he couldn't even sleep, he still couldn't understand his battle buddy's feelings. Though today he felt feelings similar to those when he was saved by that drowned knight's group. When the priestess had refused to heal him and the swordsman had tossed the potion vial as if it wasn't worth it. Then he felt like a wounded dog that everyone wanted to kick. Though he was happy to be alive, it was a feeling he would never forget. From that moment on, Bjorn vowed not to let the situation happen again, but it happened the second time he descended into the labyrinth. He evaluated situations, making the most appropriate choices, roughly speaking, focusing on the present. As soon as he opened his eyes, someone who was in a similar situation was immediately beheaded in front of him, so the decision was made to rely primarily on preserving his own life. However, as it turned out in practice, it was impossible to survive with such tactics. Therefore, it was necessary to change the plan. Bjorn woke up Einar and asked what if he showed her a way to become much stronger, but it would involve an insane risk to life. The partner agreed without too much thought, saying that they would already die if they couldn't get stronger. The guy realized that this world was filled with chaos, so they would go into the rift and destroy it. They made their way through the crowds of monsters. Einar was surprised that there were places with such a variety of species. However, Bjorn said that there was nothing surprising about it, it just wasn't popular because of the great difficulty, and the constant need to light torches. Finally, they came across the goal of their raid, a memorial to the first man to find the labyrinth. The last sage, Deflon Grandel Gabrilias. In honor of the great fallen steps, the description is the same as in the game. Bjorn warned his friend that everything further must remain a secret. She was instantly sworn to the warrior's honor, but asked what a rift was. A rift is a maze within a maze. In Dungeon and Stone it was called an instanced dungeon. It is cleared by selected characters within a limited amount of time. It requires 4 crystals from monsters of various kinds to activate. Specifically, they now had crystals from a goblin, ghoul, razor-haired wolf and dwarf, and the magic stone of a monster of rank 8, in this case it was a death demon, allows you to open a rift for 5 people. The difficulty would depend on the number of participants. Finally, the passage opened and the 2 barbarians jumped in. Part 23. A rift or instance dungeon is a passageway to another reality that appears randomly on each level. They have a recovery time on the first floor. It opens every 3 months according to city time. But just waiting is very inefficient, so there were those who found a way to open the rift forcibly. There are 4 rifts on the first level. The one where the 2 barbarians go, the whole sky is draped in red, as if the world is about to be destroyed, and clouds of ravens that fly over the heads of the adventurers on the way to the Dark Castle, the Blood Citadel. Bjorn knew where they would end up since he had used the Death Demon Crystal. Regardless of the difficulty, all the rifts of the first level are passable, so the main question is not about the monsters they will meet here, but about the rest of the squad members that will be chosen randomly. Suddenly, Einar drew her friend's attention to a portal that had opened, saying that someone was coming. The first member of the group was a dwarf, followed by a girl who came out, who, judging by her clothes, was a mage. Bjorn was glad this is a great combination, because mages are a very valuable resource for the city, so only the strongest can be in the labyrinth. In other words, she is a very strong mage, since she was here. The girl praised the barbarian for his ingenuity and introduced herself, calling herself a mage of the 6th rank, Alua Raven. She seemed a little arrogant to the guy, but considering that in the game all the characters of this class were crazy assholes, she was just cute. Alua then introduced the man beside her, informing him that he was Tarjin, the professional porter she had hired. With a smile on his face, the dwarf informed her that he was very pleased to meet her, and introduced himself, calling himself Hikuro Murad, an adventurer who had been exploring the labyrinth for 3 years now. Now Bjorn realized how he had gotten such quality equipment. Finally, he and Einar gave their names as well. The barbarian wondered why the new acquaintances were here, since they didn't look like they would be exploring the first level, but they wouldn't divulge details, saying only that they had heard the opening of the rift. Alua offered to divide the loot equally among all but Tarjin. The others agreed. Then the girl offered to follow her. The dwarf gladly agreed, declaring that following a mage in a labyrinth was a smart decision. Bjorn decided to follow his example, but for a different reason. It was the mages who convinced the ruling family to get rid of the evil spirits. However, Einar intervened, flatly refusing to obey the mage, promoting Bjorn's candidacy. She explained that he was the best warrior, different from other barbarians' wisdom, because he reads 6 hours a day. The young man tried to ask her to stop, but she wouldn't stop. The dwarf even laughed, envying Bjorn that he had a wife who respected him so much. Einar objected that she wasn't anyone's wife, but Alua interrupted the conflict, suggesting to end the pointless bickering and finally set off. But Hikuro objected that it would be a good idea to know not only the names but also the skills of the companions first. However, the mage countered that it wasn't necessary, as there would be monsters of rank 7 and below in the citadel, just her and the porter would suffice. She then added that she would take all of the keeper's loot, as she needed it for research, but what she heard made the dwarf even more angry. Such disputes in Dungeon and Stone happened often, and 100% of the time the reason was the loot. Keeper's flowers, for mages it was an item for research, but for simple adventurers it was just a lot of money. Alua then promised to give all the magic crystals she could find, but Hikuro again disagreed. Not expecting such pressure, the mage had to make concessions, promising to give some of the loot from the keeper, but the essence still had to go to her. Such an offer softened the dwarf's heart, and he agreed, offering to roll dice to see which of the 2 of them would get the rift stone. Upon hearing the word 2, Bjorn realized that he and Einar had been thrown out of the discussion altogether. The young man intervened, saying that he could not return empty-handed, so he was the one who needed the rift stone. Alua countered that they didn't need 2 barbarians on the team at all, and the dwarf confirmed, saying that it was too much for such a rift. Bjorn hadn't expected that, since they had seemed friendly when they met. Then he said that he would take 2 essences of ordinary monsters, which was the maximum he could bargain for. The companions liked the offer, and they were kind again, as if nothing had happened. Bjorn was once again convinced that he had to become stronger. He decided that he didn't care how many times those sick bastards threw the ladder down after him, he would still get to the top. Part 24. The Blood Citadel is divided into 4 parts: the drawbridge at the entrance, the battle zone behind the outer walls, the underground prison behind the inner walls, and the demon worship area in the Lord's room. Gargoyles are rank 8 monsters that guard the entrance to the fortress. Most of the time they just sit still and look like statues, but as soon as they spot an enemy they immediately attack. The most obvious way to defeat them is to sacrifice one of your squad members to petrification, but things change with a mage. He can break the curse, and gargoyles without the petrification skill are an easy opponent. Suddenly Einar drew her friend's attention to a crystal rising up, but Alua explained that she used a spell to collect them and then they would separate. With a smile on his face, the dwarf thanked his companion for making the job easier. Breaking down the door and stepping inside, Hikuro said a light source was needed. The mage cast the spell again, raising a glowing ball of light upwards. The room was filled with dead people, monsters without rank. Killing them doesn't bring magic stones, and their bodies don't disappear, there's only a chance of essence falling out. Alua said that spending mana on these creatures was useless. The dwarf and the barbarians confirmed that magic was better saved and decided to deal with the dead by hand. The fight was more like a beating, so after a few minutes all the monsters were on the ground, some even in pieces. From one of them came a huge horn. The dwarf asked how to use it, to which the barbarian said he would see for himself soon. The entrance to the first part was blocked by a steel door. Hikuro concluded that even his hammer wouldn't take one, so Alua stepped in. As expected, the bridge was up, so the mage asked Einar to blow the horn. The barbarian obeyed and soon the bridge was down. Suddenly, she noticed that the water began to rise as well. Red water, red sky, it seems this citadel is called bloody for a reason. Suddenly, Einar noticed that there was something down below, but Alua told her not to worry, explaining that they were just regular dead people. Now the goal was to wait for the bridge to come down. Surviving an onslaught of hordes of dead is quite a challenge for normal groups, but not with a mage who has area attacks. The girl used a spell and everyone was illuminated by a bright green flash. Opening his eyes, Bjorn found all the monsters lying within a few meters of them. He of course realized that Alua was a strong mage, but he hadn't realized that there was such a gap between them. Finally, the bridge lowered and all 5 of them walked forward. The first part of the bloody citadel was passed with ridiculous ease. Part 25. They passed the first part of the blood citadel with ease and headed towards the second part, the battle zone outside the outer walls. In a normal situation, they would have met a bunch of monsters on the way, but not with a mage who could destroy 90% of the opponents with a single blow. Only the death demon remained intact. Alua said that he had to be dealt with manually. It seemed that his regeneration speed was the problem. Remembering a proven tactic, the 2 barbarians grabbed the monster's legs and knocked it to the ground, followed by a kill. Seeing the second one, the girl realized what was wrong and cast a curse of worsening wounds on the monster. The main danger of the demon was in the speed of its healing. If you took away this skill, it would turn into a simple piece of meat. Now Einar understood why the others hated mages so much. Hikuro was surprised at his companion's abilities, for which she thanked him, explaining that hard training was not enough for such a result, he needed an innate talent as well. Now Bjorn finally understood the essence of her character. She pretended to be a polite assistant, but she was waiting for the slightest opportunity to boast of her achievements. Alua announced that she wanted to collect some materials and asked who wanted to go with her. The first to volunteer was the dwarf, in gratitude for all the help the mage had provided. Bjorn decided to see what they could gather as well. Soon they finished gathering resources and Alua thanked her companions for their help. While Einar was imagining how many cream cakes could be bought if all these items were sold, the young man turned his attention to the statue against the wall itself. He didn't understand why the mage didn't even look at it. After all, it was easy enough to destroy. Some gamers have a habit of hitting the interaction button as soon as they see an item that stands out, or even just a suspicious wall. The guy was one of those, so he often found hidden objects. However, not only could Bjorn hurt Alua's ego if the common barbarian knew things she hadn't learned in a lifetime of research, but it could also seem suspicious, and that was best avoided. The second part of the citadel was nothing special, no useful resources or monsters, so it was decided not to linger here, but to go straight down to the third part, the underground prison. The dwarf asked the mage what kind of monsters could be found here. Alua mentioned a number of names, including a skull rat, a banshee, a death demon, a chimera wolf, a ghoulie lord, and a corpse golem. Hikuro reported that he had fought all but the last one. In Teiko's case, the girl advised to beware of corpse explosions. The power isn't very high, of course, but the pieces are poisonous. If it exploded very close, you could even die, but she promised not to let that happen. Seeing the moving skeleton of some rodent, Einar asked her friend if the thing was a monster. Alua explained that it was a skull rat, it had no rank, and it wasn't very dangerous in battle, so it only needed to be stepped on. The barbarian was angry, because she wasn't asking a mage, but suddenly she clung to Bjorn when she heard a scary sound. Alua then explained that it was a banshee. It was best not to touch it, or the experience would be horrifyingly unspeakable. Bjorn to her that he had heard about the abilities of mages to resist these terrible creatures. The girl marveled at the barbarian's knowledge, confirming his hunch. She used the first spell to gather all the banshees around her, and then used the second to destroy them with a whirlwind of fire. Finished, she announced with a smile on her face that it was safe to move on. Once again Bjorn is convinced that the mage is a real imba. The interior of the underground prison resembles the laboratory of an evil scientist because of the ugly monsters that dwell there. For example, a chimera wolf that looks like a regular wolf but with snake heads on its body, or a ghoulie lord that looks like a withered Count Dracula. Hikuro asked Alua, who, by the way, he clearly had a thing for, if she was scared. The girl said she wasn't, since she often performed autopsies herself. She fumbled for something in the wall and said she had found a secret entrance, behind which the corpse golem must be hiding. The mage said it was best to leave her things here, and opened the passage. A horrible smell hit his nostrils, and the limitless piles of corpses blocked his view. In a previous life he would have fainted for sure, but the effect on the barbarian's strong body wasn't as strong, which was not to say the same for the rest of his companions. The porter was the first to give up, followed by Raven. She was of course used to looking at such things during autopsies, but the horrible odor triggered a gag reflex even for her. Looking at them, the dwarf was glad that at least the barbarians were all right and suggested they go on. A whole mountain of corpses appeared in front of them, from which different voices were coming. Some of them greeted the travelers, some said that they had no time, and some begged for help. Even Bjorn felt uneasy, for in the game these creatures had been silent. The barbarian told everyone to get together and get ready, but no one listened. All the squad members froze, staring into the abyss of corpses, listening to their moans. They pretended to be tough, but they were useless when the first boss appeared. I had no choice but to deal with it myself. Part 26. Dungeon Stone is a niche game, but it has a couple details that could have hooked anyone. For example, the illustrations are so realistic you'd think it was a photograph. They were so common on the internet that even people who didn't know the game itself knew them. But the guy is once again convinced that no matter how frightening the pictures are, the reality is much scarier. A mage, who has an impressive experience of autopsies, a dwarf, who spent more than 1 year in the labyrinths and met a lot of different monsters on his way, and even a porter, who looked strong enough for his profession, all of them underestimated the barbarian newcomers, but in the end, they are the only ones who kept their sanity. Suddenly something happened that Alua, who was still tearing up, had promised to protect against a corpse explosion. Suddenly the dwarf screamed as the green liquid hit his eyes. Bjorn ordered his friend to get Hikuro away and protect the mage. The young man realized that he had to distract the monster or everyone would die. The attack tactic of the corpse golem was simple blast to hit distant targets, and the near ones catch to absorb. It couldn't get too close, because then the blow would hit the mage who hadn't come to her senses yet, and that's the worst case scenario, so we'd have to stay not too close and not too far away and be bait to stall for time. Finally Alua came to her senses and gathered her strength and cast a spell, causing a vortex of fire that she directed at the enemy. The first phase of destroying the corpse golem, which required multiple torches, was completed in one blow. The monster's outer body had been weakened, what remained now was the skeleton golem. Although it was a rank 7 monster, a pair of barbarians could handle it by removing the outer shell. Bjorn ordered Einar to aim for the chest. After a few attacks, the golem slumped to the ground with a clatter, and disappeared a few seconds later, leaving behind an essence. The rift is a veritable treasure chest. There are monsters found here that aren't found in a normal maze, which means the items will be unique as well. Considering the paltry amount of experience you can get, the rift is like rain in the middle of the desert. The loot from the keepers is a coveted item for any adventurer, but the main feature of these places is the strikingly increased chance of essences falling out. It's even strange that they stumbled upon the first one so late. Einar asked what they were going to do, to which Bjorn said that the corpse golem essence should go to them. They had done most of the work, and that was the deal. Besides, the characteristics are just right for a tank. Sure, the movements will be dulled by the drop in perceptions, but it's worth it. The only problem is the skills. Corpse Blast, of course, is quite powerful, but you have to pay with your own health points, and because of the acid fluid, when wounded blood will get on the equipment, reducing its durability. In short, the skills were good, but they would cost a lot of money on potions and equipment. Bjorn suggested leaving the thinking for now, since the essence wouldn't be gone for another half hour, and getting busy treating the gnome. Hikuro berated himself for petrifying himself at the sight of the golem and thanked the barbarians for saving him. Bjorn marveled that they had almost lost to the intermediate boss due to mental problems, having enough strength to handle him, another reminder that this was reality, not a game. Hearing that Alua had come to her senses as well, Bjorn decided to discuss the fee with her. Bjorn told her that he and Einar were the ones who saved everyone, as one spell would not have solved anything. Raven agreed and asked what the barbarian wanted. The young man informed her that he wanted to take the rift stone for himself. Surprisingly, the dwarf didn't object, as he would be dead by now if not for the barbarians. Alua said she was against it, but promised that Bjorn would have a chance to get it, which he took as, "You can count on nothing more," and smiled. Then he told her about the essence falling out of the corpse golem. The mage jumped up from her seat as she explained that it was extremely rare, even the biggest guilds didn't know its effect. Biting her lip, she imagined what could be achieved if she researched such an essence. Bjorn smiled even wider. He realized that now the real negotiations could begin. The young man offered the mage to take the golem essence, but on the condition that he would take the guardian essence, if it fell out. Part 27. Alua questioned whether Bjorn was sure he wanted to give her such a powerful and rare essence, considering that nothing might ever fall out of the keeper. The barbarian said he would risk it. Then he agreed without further thought. The dwarf asked if the mage was going to feed the essence to the boy, because he had heard that mages themselves could not absorb it, but Alua explained that it would be good for research. Then pulled out a vial that was so expensive that it wouldn't pay for itself with an essence below rank 6. The mage said she had one of those alone. Bjorn wondered did she, and rightly so, want to spend her only vial on a corpse golem. It seemed to be a very rare item, so she was taking such a risk. Having finished her business, Alua signaled that it was okay to move on. They came to a corridor with 2 statues standing against one of the walls. Although they looked like gargoyles, the girl didn't feel any mana. She touched one of them and a book fell from above, which she deftly caught. The dwarf wondered if she knew about it beforehand, but she just laughed, saying she was lucky. Unfortunately for Bjorn, she stated that she would keep the item since she had found it. The young man wanted to come back here later and retrieve it, but would just have to watch the mage take his loot. Hikuro said they didn't know the first thing about distortion magic anyway, so he didn't mind. Normally, taking side items and monster items outside isn't allowed, but distortion magic helps avoid detection. However, the Book of Black Magic, the Necronomicon, did not fall under the lockdown, and judging from Raven's awkward laughter, she was well aware of that. For a while they wandered around the last part of the Blood Citadel, the Lord's Room, collecting items and fighting monsters. Gargoyles, chimera wolves, and the second intermediate boss, the Bone Rider. 3 attributes of the horseman are encountered. The first and most annoying is sadness, which exudes a fog that causes psychosis and hysteria. The second and most dangerous is hate, which uses soul killing to lower the opponent's level. And finally, the one in front of them, desire, could regenerate with life force absorption. Alua said that she could bring down his skill with wound deterioration, and she was right. It was the easiest of all the riders, who also left behind an essence. According to the treaty, it belonged to Bjorn, but this time he decided to give it to Einar. It would be false to say that he didn't want to get it, but from a player's point of view, it was better to give it to a tribeswoman. Life force absorption works well with swords, and he'd have to give up weapons one day. And from the moment he entered the labyrinth, he felt that he could rely on Einar. She would not leave him in a difficult moment. So it was better to take his time and find a suitable essence with the help of a reinforced wargear. But the only thing he didn't have time to tell her was the side effect of absorbing the essence. Suddenly her skirt fell away, exposing her woolen shorts, and the girl herself felt like Bjorn had gotten bigger, and the little gnome wasn't so small anymore. Alua tried to gently explain that the effect of the Bone Rider essence made the bones denser, but shorter. It would only affect the height, the strength would remain the same. But what she heard caused Einar to scream hysterically, saying that everyone already looked down on her because she was a woman, and now they would stop seeing her as a warrior. The mage noticed that she was much prettier that way, her features had softened, even aristocrats would be jealous. Bjorn added that everyone already knew what a fine warrior she was. He himself, of course, thought that now without tattoos he would look like an ordinary girl, but he did not voice his thoughts so as not to aggravate his depression. The dwarf joked that if he took this essence he would be out of sight altogether, and Alua suggested a detailed check when he returned to the city. Seeing that her friend was not calming down, Bjorn suggested she test her powers on the death demon that stood ahead. Reluctantly, Einar drew her sword, which she swung with such force that the monster dropped dead. The others could not believe that she had managed to crush the demon with a single blow. Hopefully, the girl asked if she was still a warrior, but the young man countered that he was not just a warrior, but a great warrior. Hikuro remarked what a lovely couple they were. Alua agreed and suggested they go on. Finally, they came to a door, beyond which the last room in the fortress awaited them. The dwarf said that their journey was coming to an end. The mage reported that she was even a little sad. She now understood why other adventurers worked in groups. Bjorn thought only about whether the essence would fall from the keeper, since the previous 2 times they had had great luck. Suddenly he wondered if in his case there had been lives when things had gone easy and simple. He couldn't wait to find out what lurked behind that door. As Hikuro reached for the handle to open the passage, Bjorn noticed that it was of some strange color, and suddenly ordered the dwarf with horror to slam the door shut. But it was too late. The information window reported that the master of the Blood Citadel had awakened from a deep sleep. Once inside, the squad members were horrified to find that the guardian had changed. Now it was no longer the horseman of death, but a monster, which is found only after the 6th level, and rarely, and an advanced mutated version with intelligence and a name, the vampire Duke Cambermere. Sprawled on his throne, he stuck his tongue out of his toothy mouth and rejoiced at the appearance of living creatures he said he hadn't seen in a long time. Part 28. In general, monsters fall into 4 categories. Mutants, critters that do not change race or characteristics, but gain new classes, for example, goblin archer or goblin swordsman. The second is advanced. It includes monsters whose rank is above the average level, death demon. A rare category are opponents like the corpse golem, which can only be found in special rifts or mimics, which are difficult to find on a normal floor. And finally, the last are those with individual character and name. Advanced mutants are named monsters. Hikuro couldn't understand where a vampire could come from in this room, but Bjorn ordered him to shut up and keep running. Vampire Duke Cambermere, a rank 5 boss who can act out of the box, strong in both melee and black magic. Alua noticed that the keeper was an advanced mutant. Bjorn knew it too, because in the game, such monsters could only be found in rifts starting on the 3rd floor. Even a person who had spent time in them. However, the enchantress couldn't understand how Bjorn knew this in advance, for he had definitely asked to close the door at the last moment. The barbarian was annoyed by her curiosity. Seriously, even in a situation like this. He asked again to run in silence, but Alua didn't run either. Then he explained that he just felt it. The red color of the pen. In the game, the guy tried hundreds of times to find the vampire, repeating after that blogger, but all attempts were in vain. Rewatching the video over and over again, he managed to notice a very small single detail, the color of the handle on the door. Suddenly the gnome stopped, asking if it was better to fight. After all, there was no escape from the tower while the keeper was alive anyway. Bjorn tried to explain that they had to get to the sunlight, but it was too late. Cambermere, who had taken on spiritual form, had already found them. That was why Bjorn hated magical monsters overly imbued. Alua ordered her companions to close their eyes and released a spell that illuminated the room with a bright light. When the effect passed, everyone was surprised to find that the vampire had disappeared. Spirit form is a type of black magic that vampires use. It allows you to move quickly, but your real body remains in place. There's just one problem with the help of release: the Duke can swap his shells at any time. If not for Raven's reaction, there could have been serious trouble. They had managed to gain about 3 minutes. Cambermere should be waking up in his room now. Suddenly Bjorn was horrified to hear that the sorceress had been injured. However, he didn't remember vampires having such an essence, which meant it was most likely the essence of another monster. Since each video ended before the player could do anything, he didn't know the full capabilities of the Duke. Right now the Barbarian had a couple of ideas on his mind, but there was no time to sort it out now. First he needed to get out of here. Bjorn ordered his companions to get out of the tower, but the dwarf objected that only Alua knew the way, and now she was wounded. The young man said he knew the right way too, but Hikuro was surprised, for everyone present thought it was the Barbarian's first time descending into the Blood Citadel. Bjorn really didn't want to seem suspicious, but survival came first, so he said that he had memorized the way and ordered to run after him. In principle, he wasn't lying, because he simply couldn't forget the map of the place he had been hundreds of times, though in a video game. Soon the exit showed up, which was a short walk away, but the vampire was already on his tail. Bjorn ordered him to run even faster. The Duke had almost caught up with the adventurers, but they managed to reach the sunlight, because of which the vampire had to hide. The guy knew very well the weakness of the spiritual form, and therefore was very glad that the sun had not yet set. The panting dwarf could not understand how the Barbarian managed to memorize the road from the first time, because they were not distinguished by special intelligence. Einar stood up for him, saying that Bjorn was a great warrior, at least he would be in the future. The young man thought about what to do next, for it was nearing evening. At last he ordered Einar to carry the mage and the others to follow him. This did not please the bearer, for Raven needed rest, but Bjorn objected that they needed cover, so they should move back at least to the outer wall, and then ordered those who wanted to get out alive to gather. Until Alua woke up, Bjorn decided to walk around and look around. He only had one plan in his head, so it was decided to examine the statue they passed by. After blowing its head off with a powerful blow, he found what he was looking for: Tears of the Goddess, a disposable item, but it heals well and is useful against monsters with the evil attribute. Upon returning, Bjorn found that the injured girl was already awake. She assumed that they had escaped from the vampire, but he would surely return after sunset. The Barbarian inquired as to what had happened to her, but the sorceress didn't seem to know exactly what had happened to her herself. She said that the effect was similar to pain sharing. She was very lucky that the ability was only rank 7. He asked how long it would take her to heal. The girl said at least 20 minutes, but then she would only be able to use the rank 7 spell 5 times. Things were not good. Bjorn asked if Alua had any solar-type spells, much to her displeasure, for it was not tactful to ask a mage about his arsenal. He knew about it, since he had read the lore, but he didn't worry about it. He was a barbarian, the pinnacle of rudeness, someone who didn't even care about talking to the king. Raven grudgingly informed him that he could use sunspots. A sun sphere is a rank 6 spell, which is like a fire sphere, but with the attribute of the sun. Bjorn asked if she could use the attribute enhancement at the same time as this. Alua said she would try it if she had enough mana, but would need another 10 minutes. Bjorn said that would buy the squad 30 minutes, and ordered the mage not to interfere, but to accumulate mana. She wondered why he spoke as if he had become the leader, but the young man objected. It wasn't that important right now. Besides, who would if not him? Hikuro laughed loudly, saying that he trusted the Barbarian because he had an eye for humanity. Night had fallen. The vampire had already appeared in the doorway. Cambermere laughed, asking the adventurers why he could not contain his bloodlust when he saw them. Bjorn ignored the taunt, ordering his comrades to prepare for battle. They would have to hold out for a full half-hour until the spell was ready. Part 29. Unveiling its huge wings and claws, the vampire headed towards the squad. Bjorn ordered the porter to pick up Raven and run away. Everything is just like in the game. Although they have a comparable intelligence score, the conversation ends in a couple of phrases. Finally, Cambermere rushed forward with his claws, but the gnome blocked the monster's blow with his shield, continuing to hold back the onslaught for a while. The first rank 7 essence is counterbalance. It cannot be knocked down or knocked back as long as its feet are on the ground. A bonus comes with amortization, a very useful skill for a tank. The barbarians decided to split up and outflank the monster. Einar was the first to attack with her huge sword, but without success the enemy deftly dodged, using wings for acceleration. But suddenly the vampire felt a strong blow from behind. Bjorn managed to hit the monster with his mace. In the next moment it seemed to the barbarian as if his arm was broken, pain sharing, but the vampire didn't even seem to notice the consequences of the heavy blow. Suddenly, Cambermere's body turned into a flock of ravens whose sharp beaks swept toward the adventurers. Bjorn ordered them to block their attack. Hikuro stepped forward using the dwarf's second essence, living armor. All the birds that hit the shield scattered, leaving only bloody scraps. Bjorn knew that this liquid was dangerous, so it was better not to touch it, but it was too late. His comrades had already fallen under the influence. The sacrificial seal is another deadly skill of the vampire. Now Cambermere will receive a boost in physical stats, depending on the number of victims within a 100-meter radius. Sacrificial seal, eternal life, which increases regeneration in proportion to health points lost, and master of blood, which allows you to gain the skill of the target whose blood has been consumed. Vampires rely on these 3 abilities for special power in combat. The problem is that Cambermere can also use black magic at the same level. Turn into smoke to dodge swords, transform into ravens to cause an explosion, or summon monsters using blood. The vampire is a high-ranked monster with truly frightening abilities. Suddenly Hikuro missed a beat, but Bjorn ordered him not to look away until he saw the Duke coming towards him. Now he realized why everyone was abandoning the game when they got to the 6th floor. The dwarf who was the main force was incapacitated, he and Einar were already exhausted, and the mage was still 5 minutes away from being reaped. Unable to find a better solution, Bjorn ordered his friend to take Hikuro and retreat back while he himself would stall for time. Reluctantly, Einar obeyed, and the young man threw away his weapon. It would not be needed, as now it was no longer a battle. Bjorn endured one attack of the Duke after another and constantly drank potions that he had taken out of his bag beforehand. Alua marveled at what she saw. She had never seen anyone fight like this before. The pain from the potions was unbearable on its own, but became worse if the wounds were serious. The vampire's long claws tore through the young man's body time after time. Even the armor was no barrier to them. Empty ampoules fell to the ground one after another. The barbarian's body even began to smoke. Bjorn could die of shock at any moment, but he managed to block some of the attacks, which in his current state was akin to a miracle. Although he took quite a bit of damage, he didn't miss a single hit to his vital points. It reminded the sorceress of what she had read recently. The barbarian's true strength was not in his body, but in his strong mind. The excited porter suggested the girl to run away, as it was getting too dangerous, but there was nowhere to go. The only way to get out was to defeat the keeper. Alua couldn't understand what she was doing here. Even a barbarian who had recently undergone a maturation ceremony could make rational decisions, and she was a mage. The girl clearly understood that everything would be over for them if Bjorn died, so she ordered the porter to help Hikuro so that Einar could return to the battle. The mage's job is not only to fire spells with the backs of their comrades. They should analyze the situation and, based on their knowledge, choose the best solutions for the team's success. Alua realized that she too had to choose a solution if she wanted to survive, so she chose the best option in her opinion. The sorceress took out an ampoule, used her aiming abilities and threw the object at the barbarian. Suddenly, Bjorn felt a surge of strength and an increase in performance. Alua spent her corpse golem essence. Part 30. His head went blank and his vision dimmed. At a crossroads, a person always has to choose what to sacrifice and what to keep. The barbarian had to set aside his weak heart. He realized that it would not be possible to block every attack, so he had to protect the key places by sacrificing the insignificant ones, for example, his arms or legs. However, at one point the course of the battle changed when the vampire failed to pierce the barbarian's bones. Bjorn realized that he had been fed essence. It looked like he would have to change his training plan significantly because of that, but given the situation, that could be sacrificed as well. Now Bjorn could move and dodge more of the vampire's attacks. Even such a small thing increased the chances of survival by an order of magnitude. Now the beating puppet could fight back. However, the barbarian realized that continuing to just take damage was not an option. Alua took aim again and threw a spell at her comrade that increased his regeneration. Bjorn rejoiced. If the fight continued like this, he might even have a chance. Gathering his strength, Bjorn used his immortal barbarian ability, grabbed his opponent and tried to throw him back. Although the vampire could now tear the barbarian's muscles, he didn't worry about it, as the acidic blood would also do its job, and the damage would immediately be healed by the potion and essence. Cambermere even hesitated for a second, but immediately tried to strike a blow that landed on his armor. Einar was already running to her friend's rescue with her blade drawn. The girl tried to hit the Duke, but he turned into smoke. Bjorn tried to take advantage of this and attack unexpectedly, but the vampire was faster. Finally, Alua reported that the sunspot sphere was ready. Gathering the last of his strength in his fist, Bjorn shoved his enemy, ordering the dwarf to prepare his lightning bolts. Hikuro swung his hammer and slammed it into the ground, sending a tremendous discharge that stunned the Combormer. Taking advantage of the hiccup, Bjorn pulled out the tears of the goddess that he had saved despite everything. The young man ran up to the vampire and smashed the vial into its mouth so that the contents went inside. A bright flash of light formed on the spot, a grace effect that temporarily sealed all of Duke's resistances and increased the damage he received. The interaction of lightning and tears turned the stun into paralysis, and then Alua used her sunspot sphere spell. A huge fireball created by the enchantress flew towards the vampire. The girl warned that standing close to it might hit it. Bjorn realized he should have run away, but it was too late. Cambermere had time to use the division of pain, and therefore the stun was transmitted to all present in the hall. And soon the spell caught up with everyone in the affected area. Bjorn woke up, not realizing what was happening. It was quiet all around, and his comrades seemed to be out. The young man even thought that they had managed to deal with the vampire, but when the smoke cleared, he saw Cambermere in front of him, without limbs and with a huge hole in his chest, but alive. Thanks to the vampire's passive skill, he couldn't be killed while his heart was still alive. The Duke's wounds were beginning to heal. Bjorn realized that if nothing was done, he would be completely healed. Since the rest of the squad was out, he decided to finish the job himself. Gathering his strength, Bjorn stood up, walked over to the vampire and knocked him to the ground. The body was turned to mush, but the heart was intact. It looked like the monster was able to defend himself with his hands. The barbarian swung around and hit Cambermere's chest, using his flesh blast ability, which turned out to be quite a painful technique. Despite everything, Bjorn continued to attack and hit, trying to finally get to the heart. His instincts were screaming that his body was at its limit. His health had already dropped below 1%, but if he didn't continue, he would still die. Bjorn was at the limit health less than 1%, and his arms were already gone. It was impossible to stop, so the barbarian decided to use the surviving body parts, and soon the vampire was dead. Bjorn gained a huge amount of experience, which increased the level, but in this game this process is not accompanied by healing, so he had to use what he had counted on from the beginning, the essence of the Guardian. The vampire's abilities were now transferred to Bjorn due to the passive skill, Source of Darkness. He could now only be killed by destroying a heart, and eternal life allowed regeneration in proportion to the health points lost. The status window signaled the end of the reverse report. Then a warning appeared on the monitor. The character was now being monitored by a manager due to abnormal character growth. Part 31. Bjorn woke up to see Einar above him, who was overjoyed that her friend had survived. The girl reported that the others had left 3 days ago, but she was very worried, for the tribesmen had been unconscious for 4 days. Counting, Bjorn realized that they had been in the labyrinth for 7 days. He stood up and was surprised to find no changes in his body, and no injuries were visible, but there was still one problem: he was not wearing pants. Einar explained that they were so disheveled that he had to pull them down, but asked his friend not to be embarrassed. She always knew that he was a great warrior. The barbarian asked what had happened while he was out. Einar told him that the dwarf had taken a certain numbered object, and the sorceress had taken the rift stone with her. Bjorn realized that he had only been able to survive by absorbing the essence, which meant that all three of the keeper's items had fallen out to them. Einar explained that she had tried to challenge Alua's decision, since they had agreed before entering that they would roll the dice for the rift stone, but the dwarf said he didn't care, and the sorceress continued to whine and insist that Bjorn had gotten the more valuable item, so he wouldn't mind giving up the stone. The sorceress seemed to be the only one who realized that the young man had absorbed the vampire's essence, and if you counted the essence of the corpse golem and the other potions she'd spent on it, she'd probably suffered one loss, so Bjorn didn't regret this distribution at all. Einar said that in the end Alua had done a bad job of collecting items and left without waiting for her companion. Bjorn couldn't argue with that, but thanked her for not abandoning him. The girl asked if they could leave now, but Bjorn asked her to wait a little longer, as he had some unfinished business to attend to. Even if Raven had gone around the entire location, she certainly couldn't find something hidden. Soon they moved to the first floor and then to Rapdonia. Many problems had arisen during the journey, so the barbarian hoped that the prophet would cover the inconvenience. In the exchanger they were able to offer him 231,000 crystals, not much, but okay if you consider the essences earned. However, the girl was not going to give the bag of money so easily, because by the standards of this world, an adventurer of the 9th rank could hardly get such a huge amount of crystals, so she asked to show him what was in the backpack behind his back. Bjorn had not expected this development, but soon city guards rushed in, informing her that the conversation would continue in the interrogation room. Erwin was exhausted after leaving the labyrinth this time. The third floor proved to be truly difficult. The power of the rank 7 monsters was immense, as was the rank 6, though her sister was fighting them. This time the raid was more like an adventure than survival. The fairy couldn't wait to brag about her successes in front of the barbarian. However, he was not at the exchange house. Erwin even thought that he had gotten lost. She dreamed again of bragging about her essence to him. She wondered if Bjorn would test it like last time. The 184,000 stones Erwin had collected seemed a suspiciously large number to the administrator, but the girl excused herself by saying that she had gone to the labyrinth with her sister. Upon hearing the name, the administrator let the fairy go, saying that her sister was a proven adventurer, so there was no problem. After taking a shower, Erwin decided to stop by Bjorn's room and invite him to dinner, but she was informed that her host had not yet returned. Bad thoughts began to creep into Erwin's head, but she dismissed them, determined to believe that the barbarian would return soon. A week later, she decided to visit her friend again, but saw the innkeeper vacating the room, which she didn't like. However, the man objected that he had waited longer than he should have, and since the labyrinth had closed long ago, it was obvious the adventurer was dead. Erwin sat under the awning of the building, weeping at the terrible fate that had befallen the barbarian. Her sister, who had barely found the girl, tried to calm her down and take her home, but Erwin objected. She was now determined to become stronger, to be able to protect anyone she cared about. Part 32. Bjorn had been in jail for a week. He was accused of being a marauder. At the first interrogation, he was shown a crossbow he had obtained and asked how he had gotten it, for barbarians do not usually use crossbows. He said he had taken it from his attacker, but the interrogator argued that he had to find out who had attacked whom first. Bjorn knew for sure that something was wrong. There's an unwritten rule: don't question adventurers without solid evidence of wrongdoing, no matter what they bring. However, the man explained that the rules had changed recently. It was now possible to investigate rank 9 explorers to reduce attacks. Life is always harsh on those without money and power, so Bjorn concluded that they cling to anyone with no connections but plenty of loot. The investigator kept asking the same question, but the barbarian stood his ground. It's about the crossbow he managed to get after the incident with the marauding group, but he didn't say anything about that mysterious girl, because she could have guessed that she had encountered an evil spirit, because barbarians always keep their promise. The investigator did not believe that the accused could survive a neck wound, and asked to demonstrate the scar. Bjorn wanted to point, but he couldn't find anything. The vampire essence seemed to heal even old wounds. Bad luck again. Reluctantly, he had to tell about the rift. But the story of the vampire amused the man, because he couldn't have been on such a low floor, and it looked like the barbarian was just lying. Then Bjorn asked to call a mage to check his memory, but the investigator objected that only adventurers of the 7th rank and above were given such an opportunity. Bjorn was ready to pay for it, but the man argued that they would get all the money after his death anyway, so there was no need to waste it, but he promised to think about inviting a mage from the guild. On the first day everything went as badly as possible. 2 days later it was no better. The summoned 9th rank mage couldn't break through Bjorn's mental barrier, but the investigator refused to summon a mage from the tower for such a small matter, and she didn't want to hear anything about Raven and the dwarf. The man kept pressing the barbarian to write a clean confession, but to no avail. On the 7th interrogation, the investigator showed the communication stone taken from the Crystal Union and concluded that the crossbowman was not Bjorn's first victim. He reported that he had checked the unique number of the stone, and received confirmation from the Union. The execution was to take place in 3 hours. Bjorn realized that the point of no return had been passed, and words would not solve this case. But he couldn't run away, because he would be wanted anyway. The only option left was to prove his innocence. Bjorn used Flesh Blast and broke the bars, stunning the sleeping guard. He tried to scream, but a kick to the head silenced the guard. The first part of the plan was done, now he needed to get out of here. He took the keys from the guard and wanted to head for the exit, but the other prisoners asked to be released as well. Bjorn realized that some of them might have committed real crimes, but the innocent barbarian didn't care, so in a minute all the cages were open. The escapees broke through the door of the Adventurers Guild Hall, rushing inside. The guards asked the other warriors to help capture the prisoners, promising a reward, so a scuffle soon broke out. Taking advantage of the confusion, Bjorn stealthily began to make his way up the stairs. He realized that those who didn't even have weapons other than a few sticks would be captured sooner or later. It was necessary to hold out at least 5 minutes. The young man did not want to run away for nothing. When he got to the right floor, he found several guards barricading the entrance to the office of the head of the branch. Bjorn used Flesh Blast, and the blood that flew down got on everyone who fought, placing sacrificial seals on them. The first guard was sealed to the floor with a powerful blow. The second tried to strike the barbarian with his sword, but was hit in the arm, and the wound healed in the same moment. He didn't even have time to be surprised before he was sent flying several meters away. Bjorn felt the power overflowing. The effect of the sacrificial seal was simply superb. The guards didn't realize what was going on, as a rank 9 barbarian was standing in front of them. It was true that lower-ranked adventurers were locked in the branch, so the warriors didn't expect to encounter someone so powerful. It only took a few blows to knock out the remaining 2 opponents. The path to the branch head's office on the 3rd floor was now clear. Part 33. He opened the door and entered, not even realizing that an ambush awaited him at the threshold. He did spot the man at the last moment, but it was too late. The blade had already cut his leg. The infiltrator was satisfied with his work, until acidic blood rushed into his face. Suddenly, a girl's screaming sounded in the room. Bjorn asked her who she was, but the wounded branch head ordered the barbarian not to touch the girl as she was the daughter of the regional leader. The wounded man even tried to threaten but was knocked out. The presence of such a high-ranking person changed Bjorn's plan. Now everything could become much easier. However, the girl insulted the young man so self-righteously that he even had to gag her with his hand. 2 more guards burst into the room, which didn't really embarrass the barbarian. He ordered them to bring the investigator, the leader of the Crystal Alliance, and not to forget the mage from the tower, or the leader's daughter would be dead. Now Bjorn decided to counterattack. He went to the balcony and loudly introduced himself to the common townspeople and other adventurers gathered in the square. Bjorn then announced that the guild was trying to frame him, an ordinary researcher of rank 9, and swore that it wasn't his fault. He was sure that now this simple abuse of power would not be hushed up so easily. The man informed Raven, who was experimenting in the magic tower, that there was an urgent call from the guild. Some madman had broken into the office of the head of the branch. He threatens to kill the daughter of the head, and also demands that a mage be sent to him. The girl said that she was ready to go, because she was just about to find someone in the city, and she herself is interested to look at this madman, as she knows one such. But she had no idea who the madman was. When Alua saw Bjorn, she was furious with him for such a reckless act. The barbarian asked her to stop lecturing, since she understood the situation, it was better to get down to business and use a spell to test her memory. The girl didn't mind, but said she would do it in exchange for one wish. The barbarian agreed, but asked that it be within reasonable limits. However, Alyua could not test her memory due to the hard mental barrier. She asked if Bjorn had any artifact, but he countered that in this situation there was nowhere for such an artifact to come from. Resigned, he asked to at least visualize the memory. Suddenly, an investigator burst into the room and asked the wounded head what had happened. The man explained that the rebellion on the lower floors was almost quelled, but one had managed to break through. The investigator was also very surprised to see a familiar barbarian. However, the man said that this defendant insisted on his innocence and recalled that this was the investigator in charge of the case, and therefore asked what the basis was for the conclusion that the barbarian was a marauder. The investigator called the barbarian's objections nonsense, because they had seized an amount of stones that the adventurer of the 9th rank simply could not have collected, and the backpack was full of equipment, including the taken crossbow and the stolen communication stone. Bjorn countered that the testimonies of the Crystal Union members had not been verified. Then the head asked why the barbarian had not been checked by the mages. The investigator justified that the check had not been done because the accused kept lying, claiming a wound in the neck, although there was no scar, as well as absorbing the vampire's essence. The head was also surprised to hear about the vampire on the first floor, but the investigator kept making excuses, saying that this barbarian had an ability that blocked magic, and he didn't dare to disturb the precious mages from the tower. The man was sure that now he would definitely crush the hated barbarian, but Alyua confirmed that Bjorn had indeed absorbed the vampire's essence. She explained that she had been with him at that moment and was certain of her statement, though she couldn't prove it with magic for some reason. The investigator interjected that maybe this barbarian just looked like an acquaintance of the sorceress and she was just covering for him, but Raven really didn't like the jerk questioning her words. She accused the man of abusing his power and feeling unpunished enough to look down on mages, but the investigator knelt down and tried to justify himself. The Mage Tower is close to the nobility in influence. They have many different factions, but together they form a strong brotherhood, supporting each other's interests. And some low-level investigator allowed himself to question the words of the representative of the Tower of Mages. The head asked to stop the altercation and said that if Raven was not familiar with the case personally, then everything that was happening would seem absurd to her. The girl did not deny it. After all, there were indeed no precedents with vampires on the first floor before, but these were not the words that the head of the branch should say. From the very beginning, the labyrinth was filled with mysterious phenomena and surprises. Anything could happen there, so the word absurd was inappropriate here. Bjorn marveled at his former battle friend's confidence. It seemed that mages were really on a whole other level, if they could even argue with the head of the branch. Suddenly, a stately man accompanied by 2 guards entered the room and asked Bjorn if he was the barbarian who had made the mess. The young man asked who it was, but realized everything when the girl he had taken hostage called the guest daddy. The man introduced himself as Neil Ubbins. Now Bjorn realized it was the leader of the region. Part 34. The Adventurers Guild runs the clans, uses command spells, and sells various information for the convenience of its members. The guild system of governance is simple. Each branch has its own head, and above them are the 13 district heads, and above them are the guild master. The 13 heads are essentially second in command, but there are some things that even they dare not do. Ubbins guards threw a frightened man at the barbarian's feet, seeing whom the investigator nearly became hysterical. Bjorn knew perfectly well who lay before him, Hearts Young of the Crystal Alliance. He reminded him of his false testimony about the communication stone. The man had tried to justify himself, but Alyua had looked into his memory and informed him that he was lying. They wouldn't just shut this up now, for the representative of the Magic Tower herself had confirmed the false testimony. Ubbins turned to Bjorn, informing him that all charges had been dropped. The barbarian released the girl and asked what would happen to the perjurer. The regional leader stated that the investigation would continue and then they would decide what to do with him. Bjorn advised the supervisor to also look into the clan headed by Young. Ubbins reported that he would have done so anyway, as the Crystal Union had been the guild's main troublemaker for a long time. The man also said that the investigator who was in charge of the barbarian's case would be fired. The one tried to justify that he did everything according to the rules, but this made the leader mad. He stated that each case would be re-investigated and if anything improper came to light, the investigator would be punished accordingly. Neil Ubbins then approached the Barbarian, offering to raise his adventurer rank to 7th as compensation, as well as replace all of his current equipment with new ones. However, Bjorn didn't like this, because he himself could reach rank 7 by possessing the essence of rank 5, so it couldn't be compensation. He even felt like the region leader was holding him for an idiot. The man objected that he only had 2 months of experience in the labyrinths, to which Bjorn ordered him to bring any level 7 adventurer here, and then it would be revealed who was stronger. Ubbins asked the young man to calm down and explained that something like this had simply never happened before. Raven confirmed that up to this point, it was true that no adventurer of rank 9 had ever defeated a level 5 vampire and absorbed its essence, so it was simply ludicrous to call compensation for something that was already due. With no other options, Ubbins inquired as to what they wanted as compensation. Without further thought, Bjorn replied that he wanted money, 5 million stones. He realized that this was excessive, but he was considered a stupid barbarian after all, so it was no big deal. The leader didn't object, most likely because of Raven's presence here. She, by the way, requested another 1,000,000 stones for her work. Ubbins also promised to pay her every penny and asked her to thank the guild master for his work. That seems to be the power of the magic tower. Alua invited Bjorn into her laboratory and held out a flask of liquid, asking for a drink. The barbarian inquired if it was water. Raven confirmed, explaining that she simply did not have any cups, but if the young man did not wish to drink water, she could offer him a couple drops of basilisk extract. Bjorn asked why she had brought him here. The girl reminded about the wish for help. The barbarian only now remembered it, because then he agreed only because he was in a hurry, but decided that friendship with the mage would not be bad. Alua said she wanted to investigate the essence the barbarian had absorbed, because it would be useful for him to learn about its possible hidden properties. Bjorn noticed that her eyes had changed, now they were full of passion for knowledge. In any case, a corpse golem was rare enough to be caught, and this was the first time the vampire had ever been the keeper of a first-floor rift, so her interest was understandable. However, she was so excited, it seems that mages in this world are something like graduate students. Alua stated that it was a mutually beneficial offer anyway. Bjorn remembered that when signing the non-disclosure documents, the sorceress had agreed to do so only on the condition that the leader would also not disclose that the barbarian had absorbed the essence, so she had done it for the sake of research, though she had tried to object. In any case, Raven had asked the young man to come here once a week and help her for 3 hours for 6 months. But that was too long, so Bjorn said he would come here for 3 months, and demanded to report back on the results of the experiments. This made the girl angry. She reminded him that he had survived and even received 5 million stones thanks to her, so he should behave a little more gratefully. In his heart Bjorn agreed, but he didn't want to give in to the sorceress. To make this relationship strong and long-lasting, the barbarian decided to show what kind of man he was. Now he began to push, saying that she owed him money, because she had force-fed him the golem essence. Alua didn't see the problem. She had given it to him for free so that the barbarian could survive, but Bjorn didn't back down. He claimed that she had done it forcibly to survive and that it seriously disrupted his plans, so he demanded 10 million stones, which was the amount needed to erase the essence of the guardian. Upon hearing this, Alua called the barbarian a true madman, for anyone himself would be willing to pay to get his hands on such a rare essence. However, Bjorn objected that this is the prejudice of the mage, because they cannot absorb essences, and any other adventurer will confirm his speculations. The girl was more than a little pissed off, and was sure that Bjorn was saying this because he thought she had no adventurers she knew. She walked over to the magic ball and summoned a certain Patsran, recalling that they had met her master some time ago. Bjorn recognized the voice of the one who had been reluctant to give him the potion after his first fight with the goblin. The swordsman also recognized Raven and wondered what the reason for the call was. The girl asked him what he would do if he was in death and someone force-fed him the essence. The question seemed strange to the swordsman, but he already had an answer ready. Part 35. Patsran stated that the answer was obvious. He would have gotten very angry. Raven couldn't believe her ears and asked what that meant. Would he really refuse even a very rare rank 7 essence that was only available in rifts? However, this did not sway his opinion in any way. The swordsman explained that there were always a number of factors lurking beneath the off-planet essence that said it would do nothing but harm. Bjorn collapsed in his chair with a look of triumph and listened to Patsran with pleasure. The man went on to explain that it was impossible to go upstairs if one simply took a bottle of water and drank it, though he suggested that this might not apply to mages like Ms. Raven. Then she asked how to compensate for it. The swordsman said he would first demand monetary compensation, at least 15 million crystals, since the cost goes up depending on how many times the essence is washed. For some reason the faithful want to take all the money for themselves. In that case, Alua wondered what Mr. Patsran would do without being compensated. The swordsman reported that, if this were indeed the case, and the culprit stood before him, he would plow the wretch on his side and kill him. Bjorn became convinced of how stupid people in this world were. If this Patsran really knows the master, then he must be an experienced adventurer, which means he must know the true price of the essence. If one asked a rank 9 adventurer who was barely making ends meet, he would think hard about this offer. This was the decisive point. An elderly man entered the laboratory laughing, marveling at how the barbarian had outplayed the mage in words. The old man then introduced himself as Dayon Tvihirian, Raven's teacher. Bjorn had heard of him. This school occupies 5 whole floors of the tower, so this is indeed the master of the great school of Altemian. In a way, he's even more important than that region leader, in other words, a very big shot. Dayon awkwardly admitted that he had overheard their conversation, which surprised the girl very much, since she had placed soundproof magic. The man informed her that she should be tweaked a bit, as there were errors in the formula. Nevertheless, his youngest student brought a man, and even a living barbarian, so he just couldn't contain his curiosity. Bjorn didn't understand what living meant. Dayen explained that most of them come here dead, or at least only with a heart. However, seeing the tense face of his interlocutor, the teacher laughed, saying he was just joking. Bjorn thought it was such a joke of the mages, so he decided to tell one of the barbarian jokes in return. He pretended to be angry and promised to smash the old man's head in, but when he saw the frightened look on his companion's face he explained that it was also just a joke. However, the atmosphere became even more oppressive, so Bjorn even stroked the old man's head. Alua thought that the barbarian had completely lost his mind, which was not surprising considering the incident at the guild. Suddenly, however, Dayon laughed again, calling Bjorn different, an interesting kid who didn't react so sensitively to his teacher's words. To finally defuse the situation, the young man apologized for his words, complaining about his barbaric nature. Finally, Dayon got down to business, recalling the compensation of 10 million stones. He pulled a box from his sleeve and suggested that this might be suitable in lieu of the crystals. Inside was Ice Spirit Ring number 9425, a number that wasn't the most impressive, but it was still a numbered item. Bjorn was very surprised to see this ring. Numbered items could only be obtained from Rift Guardians, each with a unique feature. Would this old man give away such a valuable item so easily? However, Bjorn pretended not to understand how this item could replace 10 million stones, but Dayen explained that it was just what he needed, as this item seals the essence absorbed by the owner. However, Bjorn knew the true nature of this ring, which even the teacher of the great school of Altemian seemed to be unaware of. Finally, the barbarian agreed to accept the item and got ready to leave. At last Alua reminded him of his research assistants and that he should come twice a week. The girl apologized to the teacher for having to part with the numbered object, but Dayen asked her not to worry. The ring was useless anyway, and its market value was only 1.5 million stones. The man assumed that he had managed to outwit the stupid barbarian. Bjorn thought that in this world mages are the most real intellectuals, but even they do not know some things. For example, Raven did not know about the tears of the goddess. Now the young man was sure that even such glorious creatures as mages are just nubbies in his eyes. They didn't know the true value of the Ice Spirit Ring. The hotel manager was very frightened when he saw the barbarian at the reception desk, because he didn't expect him to be alive, and he had already thrown his things away. Bjorn lost his temper, because he had paid for a week in advance, but the man promised to compensate everything. Suddenly he found that reacting so abruptly had become normal for him. The first time he opened his eyes he had seen a man beheaded, but he had been perfectly calm then. Even when he had committed his first murder, the process had been fairly straightforward. Thinking about escaping from prison, he never hesitated for a second. Even in that conversation with Diane is something a 29-year-old office worker would never say. Maybe these changes were due to the peculiarities of the environment he was in, but the feeling of discomfort was gradually growing. It was as if the instincts trapped in this huge body spontaneously burst out every time it came to a battle. His mentality also changed. It became simple, ignorant, and radically rude, just like other barbarians. If he merges with the savage essence, it's even better, because it will help him survive. Bjorn demanded 30,000 stones from the unhappy administrator. He said he didn't have that much. Then the barbarian grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and reminded him who had thrown away all his things without permission. The new room was twice as expensive as the old one. It even had a window and a private bathroom, and it was bigger. It was much better to live like that. Bjorn decided to stop by Einar's house sometime to find out how to proceed. The next day he went to the Furious Bull Tavern. When he saw his friend on the doorstep, the girl rushed to him with a hug, saying that she was worried, even though she was sure he was alive. Bjorn said that a lot had happened to him. Einar asked him if he had heard the news about the Barbarian of Freedom, who was the reason the whole town was now in turmoil. Bjorn pretended to know nothing about it and asked what the barbarian's name was. Only now his tribesmen thought about it, but came to the conclusion that they knew nothing about this hero either. The guild seemed to have covered up everything that had happened, which was undoubtedly for the best. However, the other barbarians were proud that such a hero had come from their kind, who was rumored to have defeated as many as 100 opponents and cleared his name. Others heard that this hero had also granted freedom to other innocently condemned men as well. Bjorn didn't think the rumors would spread so quickly, though he hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. Einar marveled at the beauty of Carmelby, where she was for the first time in her life. Carmelby was the name of zones 2 through 5, which surrounded Karnan like a belt. It is home to the middle class of Rapdonia, many artisans and stores. Many call this place the free market. For the equipment taken from the marauders, and for the disposal of all the equipment turned into scrap metal, they managed to get about 800,000 stones. The items obtained when leaving the rift came out to about 500,000, so Einar's share was 300,000 crystals. She was surprised that she got so much, but Bjorn told her not to be shy and to spend it properly. Suddenly Einar noticed her friend's attention to people eating clouds on skewers. It seems to be cotton candy in her mind. She couldn't contain her curiosity and bought one for herself, marveling at how someone could come up with something like that, and imagined how many cloud snacks she could buy with the money she earned. Bjorn told her to eat the hot stuff first. Suddenly, Einar thanked her friend for treating her as normal as he did before. Because she had changed in appearance, the other barbarians stopped seeing her as a real warrior. Everywhere she goes other people constantly mock her. She asked Bjorn if she had really changed that much. Bjorn did not know what to say, but Einar said that she could not go to the labyrinths with him from now on. Part 36. Einar had indeed left the team. No wonder, since her appearance had changed, but that wasn't the reason. The girl had taken a fancy to an elder saint of the land known as a sword master. Today, Einar had agreed to learn swordsmanship under his guidance after all. Bjorn even wanted to offer the master to take a day off and go to the labyrinth with them, but his friend explained that because of the beginning of special training he was forbidden to leave the Holy Land for 6 months. Now the young man understood why Einar had agreed to the training. It was, indeed, a great opportunity. However, the girl promised that she would not ask to go back when that time came, but would train hard to become a fighter who would not pull her comrade back. To make a long story short, Bjorn was unable to hold Einar back. During the second sortie, the raiders crushed her and forced her to take an oath. She then had to watch helplessly while the others fought. This was the final straw that influenced this decision. The question of a companion comes up again. Though on the other hand, there's always the option of going down the labyrinth alone, as it's much stronger now than it was 2 months ago. Absorbing the essences of a corpse golem and even a vampire guardian has greatly increased his base characteristics, and with such regeneration, Bjorn is literally invincible on the 2nd floor. Even so, he can't go further than the 3rd floor alone. Dungeon Stone was originally designed to be played as a team no matter how strong a character is. The mechanics of the game force you to find companions. As you progress, it becomes critical to stick to a specific role, so it's important to select companions with different abilities and classes. Consequently, you should create a team with players of the same level to progress through floors and hunt monsters. For example, a level 6 mage like Raven will be able to advance quickly, which will bring the young man closer to his goal. Of course, if he managed to get out of here alive. However, Alua was in no hurry, or rather, she flatly refused to join a team consisting of 2 barbarians. She explained that all members had to be at least level 6, and a hitman was required. With a triumphant look, Raven suggested that it would take at least 3 years. Bjorn realized that there was no chance here and was about to leave, but the enchantress asked him to stop talking about nonsense and turn the barbarian's attention to the results of the analysis. Bjorn looked at the paper, but he didn't understand anything, but it didn't matter, because he knew the true values. He suspected that the vampire essence would give excellent abilities, especially passive regeneration skill, magic resistance, and soul power. And that's not to mention immortality and other active skills. Now Bjorn had definitely gathered the necessary regeneration. He had been playing the game for 10 years, but he had never achieved such a fast growth. The barbarian had already said goodbye to Raven, but she held him back again, saying she wanted to ask him a question. The girl inquired about what he had put in the vampire's mouth then, for she had definitely sensed the divine power. Bjorn understood what it was about, but he could not tell Alua about the tears of the goddess, and therefore told the sorceress that she was mistaken. After all, there was turmoil. But the girl stood her ground, so the young man had to turn on fleeing barbarian mode and hurriedly withdrew. Now Alua was definitely sure that Bjorn was hiding something. The girl went to the library and found the book, The Complete Rift Information. It's a very ancient compilation that isn't even in the academy. The author is also unknown. Alua found the chapter, Blood Citadel, and started reading about the artifacts. Next to the golden mask was an item she had heard of before but knew nothing about, Tears of the Goddess. Raven picked up another book and found the full information. Tears of the Goddess is an expendable relic of unknown origin. Once destroyed, it applies a strong grace to the surrounding area. 150 years ago, during a spatial destruction, Cardinal Andrin used all 3 tears to save a pop. After that, this artifact was never heard of. The effects were exactly the same as she had seen during the battle with the vampire. Could it be a coincidence? Alua didn't understand how a barbarian who had just come of age could find and properly use such an ancient relic. Now this Bjorn certainly seemed suspicious to her. Bjorn was looking at another artifact obtained by killing the boss of the Blood Citadel. However, one can do so by fulfilling a number of conditions. It allows you to change your appearance at will for 30 days with a limit of 5 uses. When the guy played Dungeon Stone, he was terribly uninterested in changing the face of a pixel character, so he sold the mask for 500,000 stones on the market. However, in reality, where he's already been sent to prison by mistake, and soon the whole town could be your enemy, it's better to keep such an item with you. Right now, the big news in all the taverns was the destruction of the Crystal Union, as such a large and untouchable organization disappeared in just one night. The Crystal Union had created the largest network based on countless communication stones, providing various services for the adventurers of the first floor. The attitude towards its members was unequivocal scum. However, in the beginning, things were different. Many people who had trouble paying their taxes found salvation from the Crystal Union. But as they grew stronger, they became mired in corruption and began to commit atrocities on newcomers. What happened to Darius de Tertia's sister confirms that. As much as she didn't want to admit it, if it wasn't for that barbarian, things could have ended much worse. The girl even wanted to deal with the clan herself, but luckily she didn't have time. And everyone knew who they owed the destruction of the Crystal Union to, the Barbarian of Freedom. The townspeople were saying that because of this, there might even be a bill allowing adventurers of rank 9 to be interrogated without hard evidence. But what was most interesting was that the barbarian himself was rumored to be a rank 9. Darius didn't believe in such coincidences. It seemed that Bjorn had indeed not died, but had become the very same freedom barbarian. Now she understood why he hadn't returned to himself for such a long time, but she didn't know if she should tell her sister this news. Bjorn had come to the guild to look for companions there. He approached the administrator with the question. He asked to see his ID and badge, and to state his preferences. Bjorn said he wanted a team of 4, clearing floors 3 and up. Looking at the barbarian's information, the admin was very surprised to see 5 stars there. Bjorn didn't realize which stars they were talking about, but the man remembered that he hadn't said anything about them and handed over a list of suitable companions. Bjorn assumed that these stars were some kind of code within the guild. Either way, he was pleased to receive a warm welcome, but suddenly he noticed a familiar name on the list. Soon Bjorn was already sitting in the tavern with Hikuro, who was happy to see his former partner, but informed him that someone else should be coming up now. The barbarian asked if the dwarf had chosen companions. He said he hadn't yet, but there was a mage who could be considered chosen. Bjorn was pleased that they would have such a rare class on their team. He was curious to see what the mage would be like. Finally, Hikuro turned the barbarian's attention to the newcomers. Part 37. Bjorn didn't even immediately realize which of the people who entered the tavern was a mage. A young man who introduced himself as Ryal Warb came up to them and announced that he had come here to join the group of dwarves and barbarians. Hikuro also introduced himself and asked if he was a mage. Ryal asked what the odds were of meeting a mage at the right time and place, which confused the new acquaintances. In any case, the gnome indicated that it was a pleasure to meet him. Ryal identified himself as an 8th-rank mage from the royal family of Rapdonia. The barbarian was surprised, for that meant that the mage did not work for the guild as well as the magic tower, but more importantly why this dwarf knew nothing about the potential companion. Ryal praised the barbarian for such knowledge. Now Bjorn realized exactly that this self-confident young man annoyed him. Finally, the dwarf invited the companions to sit down at the table. The barbarian got straight to the point and asked the mage why he wanted to become an adventurer, since representatives of this class rarely go to the labyrinth with rank 8. He is not skilled enough to work on the middle and upper floors, and mopping up the lower floors would not bring any tangible profit. But for Ryal, the answer was simple: he wanted to become a famous adventurer and increase the fame of Baron Martoin's family. When Hikuro heard about the title, he was surprised, because it turns out that this young man is a representative of the nobility. Ryal confirmed that the husband of his mother's sister was the 3rd brother of Baron Martoin's wife. Bjorn couldn't understand why the young man would tell strangers that, and it turned out that he wasn't exactly a nobleman. Ryal was quick to say that he would not treat his comrades as anything less. The more he listened to him, the more convinced he became that they were dealing with a rogue. Pretty face and blonde hair, about 160 centimeters tall, slim build. He knows how to use everyday magic, administrative and ice-type magic and a few curses. An inexperienced rank 8 mage, full of lies and arrogance. Bjorn wasn't sure, but realized that with a mage, the number of people willing to join the team would increase, and so they struck hands. As expected, the offers poured in droves, so they had to meet with Hikuro 3 times more often, even though it felt like the barbarian was doing most of the work. Finally, the team was assembled in full and the gear was updated. Bjorn even bragged to the receptionist about his lithium armor and shield, as well as his expanding backpack, but the girl reported complaints and asked that the equipment be removed. She didn't seem to like jokes. Walking down the street, Bjorn spotted the unfortunate conjurer sitting near the corner of a building. The young man marveled at his lack of weapons, for barbarians everywhere walk with them as if their lives depended on it, and no matter how poor or hungry he was. Bjorn turned to his frightened counterpart, asking where his weapons were. The barbarian informed him that he had no money, so he had to sell it. Then Bjorn introduced himself and demanded the same of his interlocutor. The boy awkwardly, as if remembering, blurted out that his name was Terrican, son of Rain. After comparing all the facts, Bjorn came to the conclusion that this jerk was undoubtedly an evil spirit. Terrican appetizingly devoured everything on the table in front of him, promising his new acquaintance that he would never forget his kindness. After questioning, the spirit revealed that he had gone through the ceremony a month early, but had been unable to enter the labyrinth because he had gotten lost, though he had most likely run away for fear of fighting monsters. Running away from an excited mob of barbarians isn't difficult, the real trouble starts after that. It seems that Terrican had tried to find work in the city, but of course no one would risk taking some savage to his place. Bjorn wondered if these players had discovered the boss room as well. Someone so experienced surely must have known how barbarians were treated here, but they still didn't go into the labyrinth. Bjorn asked the poor man to continue what he was doing for the next month, but the man again claimed he had not gone to the labyrinth. This pissed the young man off, but Terrican justified that he couldn't fight monsters with his bare hands. That was the reason it was worth going to the sweep the first time, it was elemental. Bjorn began to question whether this guy had even played Dungeon and Stone. Terrakin then reported that he had been kicked out of the inn for lack of money. He tried to come to the barbarians, but they wouldn't let him in. So he had to live on the streets, fighting cold, hunger, and disease. Although this was exactly what Bjorn expected, he still couldn't understand how this guy managed to last 3 months if he behaved like this. The young man wondered that if he too had chickened out and ran away the moment the portal opened, he would have suffered the same fate. Finally, Terrakin finished his story and wondered if he didn't feel sorry for him, if he didn't want to help. Then he added that he knew the labyrinth very well, but Bjorn flatly refused to take him with him. Instead, he handed the boy 150,000 stones and advised him to spend them on weapons so that he could go down into the dungeon. Terrakin thanked his savior and promised to repay his kindness. In that case, Bjorn asked him to leave and not come back. Whether he wasted the money, spent it on weapons, or even got rich and decided to repay the favor, Bjorn threatened him to never try to look for him again. Sitting in his chambers, Bjorn regretted being so rude to Terrakin. It reminded him of how a group of overconfident knights had nearly left him for dead on his first trip into the labyrinth. Any sane person would have said it was foolish to act that way, and an emotional one might have chided the poor man for not helping enough. Either of them would have been right. But that was the best Bjorn could do in that situation. He hoped with all his soul that Terrakin would manage the money properly and survive. Finally, the day to enter the labyrinth arrived. Bjorn's team consisted of a human mage of the 8th rank, Ryal Varbdwaki, who marveled at every little thing and was called a weasel. Human Braun Rothmiller, rank 7, who had 8 years of intelligence work, seemingly the most normal of the group. Beastman Misha Karlstein 7th rank and adventurer experience of 5 years, she had a strange habit of saying Naya all the time. The girl attributed it to her origins, but Bjorn had never seen anyone like that. By the way, she claimed to be the 13th princess of some tribe. A rank 6 Hikuro Murad dwarf and finally a rank 7 barbarian tank. Thus began their first exploration. Part 38. Under Rothmiller's leadership, the group made it to the second-floor portal in only 10 hours. That's a pretty good time, but the man was clearly upset that someone had gotten here early. However, knowing where the portal was the job of a guide, and since Rothmiller wasn't one, Bjorn didn't expect much. The barbarian was also disappointed at not being able to earn experience for opening the portal. If he had gone in with Einar or Erwin, he would have been able to use the maze bug, but decided to hold off on revealing such a valuable observation until he was sure his comrades were reliable. Finally, they stepped through the portal and found themselves in the den of beasts on the second floor. This is an area that can only be accessed from the eastern end of the labyrinth. As the name implies, it is home to mostly beast-type monsters. The dwarf bantered with the mage, who vomited from the stench of the area. Bjorn asked Rothmiller how he was feeling, for he had the olfactory essence. The scout said he was fine, as it was not the first time he had cleared the lair, but he warned about the many mud pits and asked those who didn't want to fall through to follow him. The lair of the beast is an area in a canyon and looks like a labyrinth, where you have to wade through intertwined rock crevices in search of the right path. There are no traps here, but the role of a guide is much more important than in Goblin Forest. The monsters here are so simple that they shouldn't pose much of a threat. A razor-headed wolf, a saber-toothed tiger, and a werewolf were dealt with fairly quickly. Thanks to Dwaka's alarm magic there could be 4 guard shifts, so Bjorn managed to sleep for a full 6 hours. The mage didn't understand at all why there was a need to be on duty, but the dwarf explained that the alarms only warned of approaching monsters, but adventurers were much more dangerous in the labyrinth. Hikuro advised Ryalf to rest, since it wasn't his turn to be on duty. Bjorn, who had overheard the dialogue, suggested that this was the last exploration with this mage. On the second day, the travelers were almost at the portal. The third floor is a huge map. If the location of the second depends on the place you moved from, the third floor is the same for everyone. Misha asked the barbarian how long it took him to get to the third floor and told him that it took her 3 years. Bjorn asked in surprise how long it took her to get to the 4th floor. The girl replied that 4 years was as long as it took the dwarf. She didn't like that, because Hikuro had less experience, but he argued that she was from a good family. Rothmiller ordered the altercation to end before it went too far, both apologized and stopped arguing. Bjorn noticed that his throat sounded more irritated now than it had before. The scout works hard on his own though, so he had a right to be angry. Soon the team moved to the third floor, and found themselves at a hill of steel rocks. Suddenly, Bjorn ordered the scout to retreat and covered himself with his shield. In the next second, a huge monster lion struck that shield with tremendous force. While holding back the monster's onslaught, Bjorn couldn't understand why it appeared right next to the portal. The beast appeared very unexpectedly. If it wasn't for the shield, the barbarian would have been trampled, just like a dwarf. Fortunately, Hikuro had time to apply emergency recovery and got to his feet. He informed Bjorn that the huge creature was called Iantro. The gnome advised that they should not let themselves be thrown further away. Doing so would be difficult due to the Ianthro's active skill, weight balance, which gives it extra stability and resistance to toppling over. By the way, this ability that Hikuro possessed came in very handy in the Blood Citadel, as it did now. While the dwarf held back the onslaught of the boar, the mage cast a corrosion spell on him. Taking advantage of the hiccup, Murad jumped up and sealed the monster's head to the ground with a powerful hammer blow. There was only one left. He was being held back by the barbarian. Misha unsheathed her blade, summoned the essence, and in a deft leap struck the Iantro in the neck, causing him to fall off his feet with a clatter. At last the monsters were finished, but Bjorn had one thought: this was not the place where the lions were supposed to appear, so where did they come from? The barbarian asked Rothmiller if there were any people nearby. The one used his active skill, heat search, which was a special mode of vision that illuminated the heat nearby. No one was detected, but judging by the smell, someone had been here recently. The scout reported that they were about 2 minutes away. It appeared that someone had watched them hunt, and only then left. Bjorn concluded that they themselves might be hunted. Luring monsters to the portals is a common tactic of marauders, who take advantage of the moment when adventurers are most vulnerable. Misha became angry, suggesting that they chase the villains down and beat them up, especially since there's money for killing a marauder. However, Rothmiller objected, because it could be dangerous. Besides, there is no evidence. If something goes wrong, the guilty will be those who killed. Misha was not confused. After all, the dead do not talk, but the dwarf suggested just writing a warning at the entrance to the portal. They continued on their way. The girl praised Rothmiller for such an excellent method, but he said that he himself was experiencing it for the first time. After all, one does not often have to face marauders. Hearing this, Bjorn asked how many times they had encountered them. Misha reported about 8 times in the last 5 years. That was very few. The barbarian said he had encountered marauders at least 5 times in the last 3 months. The comrades laughed off what bad karma the barbarian had. Hikuro had heard that about 150 years ago that was the case, but things had gotten much better recently. Rothmiller asked him to stop laughing at Bjorn, because everyone knows that MS. Karl Stein is pretty lucky. The young man knew he wasn't the only one, but the scout said he encountered criminals about once every 3 months. That was still too little, so Bjorn asked everyone to just keep walking. The guys dealt with a couple more monsters along the way and decided to stop for the night and head to the next area tomorrow. The reason they decided to stop at such an inconvenient place like the border of the areas was because it had the least amount of monsters. Hikuro wondered if the mage was alright, for he was usually talkative, but now he looked like he chewed shit. Dwaki admitted that his idea of a sweep was shattered. He realized he might be seen as naive and cowardly, but he couldn't take it anymore. An adventurer who kills other adventurers, an adventurer who claims that this killing will bring money. Reality is definitely harsher than fantasy. Dwaki realized that sooner or later he too would have to kill a man, so he has been preparing himself for this moment all along the way. Though he feels ready, he doesn't know if he'll be able to take the life of another adventurer when the time comes. Bjorn has noticed that their mage is full of insecurity, fear, and confusion. He's much better than those guys who lie and then cry when faced with real danger. Rothmiller advised him not to be presumptuous. He then asked his comrades to give him some time as he wanted to show them something. Part 39. Rothmiller led his companions to the edge of the cliff, where they had a stunning view of the castle and the surrounding area, but the bright spots of light struck them most of all. The scout explained that this phenomenon can be observed only at this time. No one knows why it occurs on the 3rd floor, but when seeing such beauty, the reasons are not so important. Rothmüller asked the mage if he had the courage to continue the expedition. When the light faded, the labyrinth was once again plunged into pitch blackness. All but Bjorn went to bed. The night watch was on him tonight, but later sighs were heard from Dwaka's sleeping bag. In all this time, only 50 experience points had been gained. 3 times that amount is needed to reach level 4, and so there's still a long way to go. At the moment, the Barbarian's essence limit is 3. Considering that he had only absorbed 3, we can take our time. It would be nice to absorb another good one. Soon, Rothmüller announced that they had arrived. There was an orc settlement ahead. Orc settlement, among all the locations of the 3rd floor, the most monsters are concentrated here. The peculiarity of this location is that all the monsters possess rank 8 or higher. In terms of difficulty level, the orc settlement ranks 2nd. However, if there's no need to go directly to the portal, this is the perfect place to hunt. The dwarf suggested looking around first and then thinking of a plan, but a group of orcs were already approaching. The comrades decided to take the battle order and proceed as planned. Dwaka and Rothmüller's task was to attack from a distance while Bjorn and Hikuro were in the vanguard and Misha dealt with the enemies one by one. The orc shaman used a madness spell, increasing the warriors' resistance to attack. One of them managed to break through to the rear. In such a case, it was necessary to protect the most vulnerable in the team, the mage. The scout put his crossbow away and ordered Dwaki to hide behind his back. The orc struck with his huge sword, but hit Rothmüller. Misha, who had managed to step back, jumped up and struck the monster in the head with her blade. The shaman tried to throw a spell again, but Bjorn blew his head off his shoulders. The fight was over. It had taken about 8 minutes for everything. The team was definitely lacking in damage. Though it's expected when you have 2 warriors with shields and a scout, things were going smoothly despite the low speed. Bjorn even liked the work of his comrades. Thus they managed to make their way to the center of the orc settlement. As they advanced, the number of monsters kept increasing and increasing. Once, the guys even encountered a great orc warrior of rank 7. Even still, they made it through, but Bjorn knew that when things went too well, something was bound to go wrong. A huge fireball made the travelers stop. The barbarian was shocked. If that thing hit them, it would be very bad. The old sorcerer who had thrown the spell said that this settlement belonged to the Zarvi clan and ordered them to leave immediately. Dungeon Stone is a single-player game, but surprisingly there is a territory control mechanic here. This was originally intended to limit player movement around the map until the main story developed, but later they added a control system for the guilds of the players themselves. Naturally, this requires a lot of manpower, so it's not very profitable if there isn't a rare mob or boss at the location. But Bjorn couldn't understand why this particular clan, and even on such a low floor. Hikuro asked what they were doing in the orc settlement, as he had heard that the Zarvi clan operated on the 6th floor and higher, but the mage was unwilling to explain. The dwarf went on to say that some guilds had special rights in the dungeons, but he couldn't even assume that this was the case with Zarvi, and he couldn't be sure that these guys belonged to this clan at all. Bjorn admired Hikuro's courage. He probably behaves like that because of his duties as the leader of the group, but he keeps quite well. Suddenly, the barbarian felt someone grasp his armor. Turning around, he saw Misha shrinking in fear. Could it be that she was afraid of someone? The girl turned excitedly to the same beast man who stood behind the sorcerer, calling the boy Talon or Afernan. The one recalled the request not to call him by that name outside the house. The old man inquired if the girl was his sister. Talon confirmed the hunch. The man said he was indebted to Mr. Karl Stein, so he would honor any request, but the guy said it wasn't necessary. Although he could not reveal the details of family affairs, but he was sure that his father would not object. In that case, the sorcerer decided to tell the travelers the reason for being here. For certain reasons, they need the essence of a great orc warrior. If everything went smoothly, they could hunt here next time, but for now he asked to go somewhere else. Bjorn couldn't believe that the guild had come down from the 6th floor just for this essence. After all, it wasn't that rare. The sorcerer stated that there would be no monsters left while they were here anyway, so it would be better for the travelers themselves to go elsewhere. Bjorn suggested that if they didn't leave, they would likely be killed. In a labyrinth, the rules are dictated by whoever is stronger, so it would not be reckless to disrespect them. Hikuro was very reluctant to leave, The barbarian understood his desire to do his best for his team, but if you want to survive, you have to understand when to retreat. Dwaki suddenly stepped forward, promising that he would sort it out. He introduced himself to the elder mage, saying he was a recognized 8th-rank mage of the royal family of Rapdonia, but the old man called him mere trash and ordered him not to call him his elder. The sorcerer rebuked the youngster for learning a couple basic spells and daring to call himself a mage. Someone who survives on street performances cannot say that he has devoted his entire life to the study of magic. Dwaki lost the verbal battle with a snap. It really did seem to hurt to hear such words in his own direction. The dwarf stood up for his comrade, saying that it was already too cruel. Bjorn really didn't want Hikuro to get into an argument, but it was too late. The old man countered that he had simply told the truth, but the dwarf wished to discuss it another way. Hikuro jumped up and, summoning lightning bolts, prepared his hammer. It looked like he was indeed going to fight the guild from the 6th floor.